Azerbaijan as a country producing oil and gas also playing a very strong role securing the energy security of the entire world, especially in the Europe. Pay special attention to the environmental issues because as many other countries, my country is also affected by the change of environment. Azerbaijan in the level of the parliament implements a number of the projects to improve the green energy transformation policy in the country. We are committed also to increase the share of our green energy in the electricity production in Azerbaijan. By 2030, the share of the green energy in the total electricity production will be 33%, which will increase from 20 to 33%. And Azerbaijan has joined COP29 green energy, green economy initiatives. And we very much believe that a number of the projects which we have been implementing now, constructing green energy plants in Azerbaijan, will contribute climate change policy of Azerbaijan. In 2021, we approved the new act on the green energy and renewable energy, and which at the same time number of the acts are now in the process of implementation approved by the government. And we are very lucky that in framework of the COP29, which Azerbaijan will host in November of this year, IPU and Parliament of Azerbaijan agreed to implement parliamentarian platform where we will all get together and talk about the role of the parliaments, which will be in line with the subject of the COP29 environmental financing. We will talk about our strong expected role, supervision and oversight role, at the same time increasing the budget as from the government as well as from the private sector. So using the chance, I am very happy on behalf of my country, on behalf of the Parliament of Azerbaijan, to extend invitation to all our colleagues. We will definitely come at the end with the outcome document which will serve to our main goal, main challenge which we face today, to protect the environment and to fight with the climate change.
Bir. Bir, iki, üç, dört, beş. Test. Раз, два, три.
Bunlar nədir? Zibildir bu.
Bir.
Nədir? Alo. Aha. Aha.
Bir.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are starting our next session. We are kindly asking everyone to take their places. Dear participants, we begin our session 1, dedicated to the Making Climate Commitments a Reality, Parliament's role in raising mitigation ambition and implementing nationally determined contributions. And the moderator of the session is Mr. Moses Kajwang, member of the Senate of the Republic of Kenya. May I invite the moderator and all the panelists to the stage, please.
Honorable members, honorable speakers of parliament, parliamentarians, and distinguished guests, the English say that time and tide waits for no man. And we also say that parliaments wait for no man. So the business of IPU shall continue. I'd like to call to stage the following panelists for our session. And this is the first session where members of parliament will have an opportunity to raise questions and make comments. I know we've been quiet since morning, and yet our job description is to talk. So this is that session where members of parliament will talk. On stage, we have Mr. Pablo Vieira. He's a global director, NDC Partnership Support Unit. We have Ms. Alina Avechenkova, a distinguished policy fellow and lead for governance and legislation at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at the London School of Economics. We also have Mr. Lukas Hammer, a member of the National Council of Austria and a fellow politician. Honorable members, distinguished guests, it is a pleasure to join you here at this very important parliamentary meeting at COP29 with delegates from around the world. Following the excellent and thought-provoking remarks we had in the opening sessions this morning, we will now move on to the first thematic session of this parliamentary meeting. I am pleased to be moderating this session on making climate commitments a reality, the role of parliaments in raising mitigation ambition and implementing nationally determined contributions. As we know, climate action remains insufficient. The global stocktake that concluded at COP28 last year showed that the world is far off track from meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement. 2025 marks an important year, as it is when revised NDCs must be submitted. As parliamentarians, we have a critical responsibility to make sure the next round of NDCs are ambitious and that they keep the global temperature goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius alive. In this session, we will explore how mitigation commitments can be effectively translated into national action. We will also discuss the important role that parliaments play in the development and implementation of the next round of NDCs. And as members of parliament, as you frame your questions and as you listen to the panelists, you probably might want to ask yourself, are you aware of the NDCs from your respective countries? The people you represent, are they aware of those NDCs? And do they care about the NDCs? You may want to reflect as a member of parliament, does the executive report back to parliament on implementation of the NDCs? Are you doing a national stocktake on an annual basis? Do you know how much it will cost to implement your respective NDCs? And in your budgeting and resource allocation role as a member of parliament, are you confident that you are allocating adequate resources to the NDCs? And since there is also a fellow politician who's a member of the Green Party, we'll be asking ourselves the question, is green politics good politics? And what is the meaning of good politics? Is it politics that wins elections or politics that change the lives of the people? We want to hear from you, honorable members of parliament, but we will also listen to the leading experts on climate change and particularly persons who have done a lot of research and work on NDCs. In the last part of this session and in all subsequent sessions, we plan to have time for delegates to take the floor. We had asked that you fill out a request to take the floor form. That form has been filled, and I have only 13 requests. Unfortunately, there's only one lady in the list. So if because we need to have the gender dimension when it comes to the conversations here, I don't think the voice of one lady will be sufficient to represent the members of parliament here. So I might allow one or two ladies from diverse regions, if need be, to ask a question to the panelists. We will do our best to accommodate as many requests as possible, but it will depend on how we manage time. Honorable members, when you get an opportunity to make an intervention, I plead with you to limit it to 2 minutes. I also plead with you to desist from making country statements. That has been the trend in past IPU meetings, that we could focus on the content of the presentations before us. But if we manage time, then all the 13 who have requested for an intervention will be able to speak. I would now like to invite our first panelist, Mr. Pablo Vieira, who is the Global Director of the NDC Partnership Support Unit. Mr. Vieira will discuss some of the important work being done through the NDC partnership to translate NDCs into actionable policies and programs. Mr. Vieira, I give you the floor. 5 minutes, 7 minutes max. You may proceed.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pablo Vieira. I'm the Global Director of the NDC Partnership. The NDC Partnership is a coalition of more than 230 members, including 130 countries and more than 100 international institutions that support developing countries advance the development and implementation of their NDCs. By supporting more than 100 countries from around the world, we have a lot of insights, and I'll start by answering a couple of your questions. Stocktake, not really. Very few countries have done a stocktake in terms of how far they have gone in implementing their previous commitments. Budgeting, very little. Domestic finance is not normally integrated into national plans and budgets to advance many of the commitments that developing countries have. Tracking implementation, not really. So a lot of the new NDCs that are being developed without informing them on what has actually happened on the ground. Some of the support that we're providing through our members is actually on taking stock of the previous almost 10 years of commitments through the first 2 rounds of NDCs. So a lot more needs to be done, and keeping governments accountable in terms of their commitments is a fundamental effort that needs to be strengthened across the world. The partnership provides tailored support to our developing country members for both the development and implementation of their NDCs, including areas of support like analysis to inform policy and regulations, finance mobilization, and setting up monitoring and evaluation systems that allow them to report to the convention. Key to all of this is a whole of government and a whole of society approach and coordination, both looking at vertical coordination and horizontal coordination, which would help countries place climate action at the center of their development agendas, build technical capacity and mechanisms for greater transparency, and effectively mobilize finance. The role of all of you in this room as representatives of communities and populations on the front line of climate change impacts is fundamental if we are to move things as fast as we need to. At the NDC Partnership, we know that countries you represent are striving to urgently turn ambitious climate commitments into action. A key ingredient, though, is access to finance, something most of our developing country members struggle to attract and absorb. In fact, finance-related requests are the #1 area of support received by the NDC Partnership. These requests include everything from developing instrument of policy and regulatory frameworks, to investment plans, to integrating NDCs into fiscal policies, and developing and financing projects. We urgently need to close the implementation and finance gaps at the national level to keep the goals of the Paris Agreement in sight. This was the main conclusion that we saw from the last global stocktake from last year. This requires countries to own and commit to ambitious climate action, promoting critical enabling factors that will allow countries to increasingly access finance. Countries need high-level political ownership. They need commitment to ambitious climate action at the center of the development agenda, including the development of strong NDCs to be submitted next year. They need enabling policies, legal frameworks, and regulatory frameworks to advance climate action and mobilize finance. And they need coordination, capacity, and transparency. As parliamentarians, you hold the power to unlock these building blocks and support factual collaboration across sectors, levels of government, and planning processes. Putting people front and center of these efforts is critical to ensure that NDCs reflect development priorities and that underrepresented voices are heard. This approach can build credibility and access to finance by clearly signaling closely aligned NDCs and national development plans and processes. Clear and consistent communications with the public across the NDC development and implementation process also builds the ownership and trust by all relevant stakeholders needed to jointly withstand profound socioeconomic shifts that are needed if we are to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. At a time when we are facing an uncertain geopolitical context and where 2024 will most likely be the warmest year on record, collective action to address climate change is more important than ever. The NDC Partnership is supporting governments to develop NDCs 3.0, the next iteration of climate commitments countries need to submit next year. They need to be high quality, ambitious, implementable, and investable. Implementable NDCs include targets that are supported across levels of government and whole of society and have well-defined implementing structures. Investable NDCs include costed actions, identified sources of financing, and well-defined enabling laws and policies backed by strong national buy-in. A key component of raising climate ambition is in the next NDC round will depend on the successful implementation of current NDCs through sustained and increased investment both from national and international sources and the private sector. The partnership helps countries enable their NDC targets with national policies across the frameworks, including through innovative financial solutions and de-risking instruments, policies and legislations such as carbon pricing and emission standards, legal frameworks that underpin regulatory efforts, and public-private partnerships to attract additional funding. As representatives of your countries, you play a critical role in defining frameworks and enablers to advance climate action. You ensure there is transparency and stakeholder engagement, putting your constituents at the center of the case for action. The role of the partnership is to connect the government's needs and priorities with resources, experts, and funding from more than 100 institutional members. Tackling this challenge requires commitment from all of us. We need willingness and leadership from countries, guidance and expertise from partners and agencies, and financial resources from funders, donors, and financial institutions. We stand with you as the NDC Partnership to support the efforts of your countries in this unprecedented moment, where we need strong collective action if we are to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. This is one of the last opportunities, if not the last, as the window is closing. So let's commit to strong climate action from Baku to Belém and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you very much, Pablo. I am sure that members of parliament will be asking you how you match the plans to resources, as you have clearly pointed out that the plans must be implementable from the perspective of having resources available. Allow me, honorable members, to introduce the next speaker, who is Ms. Alina Avechenkova. She's a distinguished policy fellow and the lead for governance and legislation at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at the London School of Economics. She's a leading expert on climate policy and governance, including climate legislation. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Chair, distinguished delegates. At the Grantham Research Institute, for over 10 years now, we've been collecting and researching all climate laws and policies around the world, which we present in the open access database that is available on our website. So today we count with over 2,000 laws adopted by national parliaments or general assemblies, and more policies at the national level. At our institute, we have also asked the question, do those laws make a difference? And if they do, which of the elements are the most critical ones? So in my remarks today, I want to focus on three things. First, the political challenge as we look to the update of NDCs that Pablo referred to coming up this year. Secondly, do laws make difference, judging by the experience of countries which were pioneers in those areas? And thirdly, what are the most critical elements Parliament should focus on when designing or amending their climate change legislation? So on the politics, when we talk about raising ambition, the global stocktake last year under the Paris Agreement, which has assessed the first 5 years of implementation, has identified two key challenges. First, the ambition challenge. We clearly need to increase the ambition on emission reduction, but also on adaptation globally, with industrialized countries taking the lead, but all of us have to take part in that. And secondly, we clearly face credibility challenge, where, as Pablo was saying, many ambitions that countries have set out in their NDCs, but also sadly in some of the national climate laws, are actually failing to be implemented. And that's what my first message today. When we think about ambition, it's not enough to set an ambitious target. It actually is sometimes more important to set ambitious mechanisms for integrating that target into the national governance and legal systems. And that's why your work, the work of national parliaments and national assemblies, is absolutely key. And that's why it's absolutely key for the countries to provide clarity domestically, but also to the international community on how those targets will be implemented. And climate laws is one critical channel instrument that countries are using to do that. Secondly, do climate laws actually make a difference? I think those countries which have gone ahead and implemented climate legislation, they have a number of expectations. We all live in different political and socioeconomic contexts, and so there is no one-size-fits-all. But what we have learned from our research, we have looked at 4 countries: United Kingdom, Ireland, Germany, and New Zealand. We also did some research in Fiji and Spain. And one of the questions we asked was, Do climate laws, which in some of those countries have been in place, like in the UK for over a decade, and a little less in Ireland and Germany and in Fiji, do they actually make a difference? We interviewed over 100 professionals across those countries, including government representatives, members of parliament, media, NGOs, and private sector. And here are some key messages that I can share with you today. First of all, across the world, what we're seeing is that climate laws really make a difference in strengthening government's ability to deal with climate change, in improving national climate governance infrastructure, and in that, in particular, clarifying who is responsible for implementation of different parts of climate policy, and most importantly, ensuring that climate concerns are not just the concerns of the climate ministry or environmental ministry, but they actually become concern and the decision-making factor for Ministry of Transport, Energy, Agriculture, Water, and Infrastructure, and you name it, basically the whole government approach to climate change. And in particular, that is ensured through setting clear emission reduction targets, long-term, but also intermediate steps of achieving them through the climate laws. And secondly, establishing clear responsibility for the government to develop cross-sectoral, whole economy, national climate change plans on mitigation and adaptation that articulate how those targets are to be met. And what we have seen from analyzing those countries is that those requirements set in the national climate law really push the government to work together and to improve coordination, as Pablo was saying, which is one of the key challenges, and to improve mainstreaming of climate into development policy. Second, we see clear impact of climate laws on accountability of the government. When it is clear who is responsible and there is transparency, and many of these laws include the requirement for the minister in charge of climate policy to appear every year in front of the national parliament to report on progress with implementation of national climate law. And that is very impactful because that provides for transparency and provides a vehicle for public pressure to actually judge if something is not being done, what needs to happen, when, and to take appropriate decisions. Thirdly, climate laws are clearly enabling this vertical coordination that Pablo talked about, which are very important in the context of NDC implementation. I give you an example of Ireland. Before the recently adopted national climate law, local authorities in Ireland could only work on adaptation. They had no authority to tackle mitigation. Well, now they do. And the law actually requires them to prepare local climate plans, which are consistent with the national ones, and that is already improving collaboration across bordering local authorities in that respect. Finally, I think as politicians you would probably ask, well, do climate laws help against political backsliding and policy reversal? And what we find is the picture here is definitely they do help on the long-term targets. However, for implementation of specific policies, to prevent backsliding, we need sustained political pressure even after the law is adopted. So that's a very important message. The job is not done after the passage of legislation. And in the last minute I have available, I wanted to reiterate what are the key elements of climate laws that do make this impact based on our research. Firstly, the long-term targets backed up by either a mechanism for how intermediate targets are to be established, which some countries are using carbon budgets, other countries already integrate intermediate target for 2030, 2045, 2040, and so far into their climate laws. But it's important to have that long-term target and the way to get there. Secondly, a clear requirement for governments to prepare plans for how they're going to meet the target, and a requirement to assess implementation annually and when necessary to take corrective action. Thirdly, the requirement for public consideration of progress to be made in front of the parliament, and also with the participation of so-called independent expert advisory bodies. In many countries they're playing a very important role. Experts which are not politicized, do not represent political parties or stakeholders. And finally, it's very important to ensure that there is also a process for engaging with stakeholders and engaging citizens and communicating the objectives of climate law, the climate policy, and the progress that is being made. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Alina. And I know that honorable members would also be asking whether climate laws can reduce the risk profile of a country. We have heard from experts that a stable, predictable, and clear regulatory regime encourages investments in clean and green energy. And maybe when you get an opportunity, you may want to talk about that in addition to the comments that will come from members. Allow me now to introduce the politician on the panel. This is a member of the National Council of Austria, Mr. Lukas Hammer. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear Excellencies, dear members of Parliament, dear colleagues, have you asked yourself, why are you here? Why are you here at the COP29 in Baku? I can tell you why I am here. I am here to fight for the future of my two daughters. As we are heading towards 3 degrees global warming, their future is at risk. And their future and the world as we know it now will be destroyed. If we fail, the future of all our children will be destroyed, and this is unacceptable. We are here a room full of lawmakers from all around the globe, and if we take all the necessary decisions, if we take all the required legislation, we can still win this fight. And yes, as a person from Austria, from the global north, I have to admit that the challenges and responsibilities we face differ immensely between the global north and the global south. But it's about our common future, and as parliamentarians, each of us has an enormous responsibility. We all can make a big difference. In the last years, I have not been only member of parliament, but I had the privilege of being member of a governing party in my home country, Austria. And we had a coalition with the Conservative Party. I am from the Green Party. And we agreed on a very ambitious climate agenda, including a target of climate neutrality by 2040 and ambitious measures. And I just want to mention a couple of them. We passed a renewable energy law that I myself negotiated, where we increased funding for renewables, and one of the results is that it helped to quadruple our PV solar photovoltaics installations. And now we have already nearly 90% green electricity in our grid. We introduced the so-called climate ticket, which is a single affordable ticket for all public transport in the whole nation, for all buses, railway systems, metros, that you can use for €3 a day, and which changes the way people use public transport. We banned the use for fossil fuel-powered heating systems in new buildings. And we helped getting people rid of their old oil and gas heating systems by increasing subsidies, in particular for low-income households. So, for example, for the lowest 30% of income households, they get up to 100% of the cost paid by the states for a clean heating system. So everyone can be part of this transformation. In order to make these measures reality, we had to fight very hard, especially in the parliament. Fights that shouldn't be this hard, given the fact that we're all in this together. And along the way, we also lost some fights, and including the fight for a climate law. I want to share with you some of my conclusions. First of all, climate policies are working. We see the results. This year will be the third year in a row where in my country the emissions are in decline. In only 3 years, from 21 to 24 now, we had a decrease of 15% of greenhouse gas emissions in my country. And while we all know that this is still not enough and that we still need a lot more ambition, we finally started moving in the right direction. Secondly, in our coalition with the Conservative Party, it was fairly easy to agree on a non-binding target and programs on the government level. However, all the efforts to make these targets legally binding were blocked. And agreeing on specific measures, and that's what you were pointing out, agreeing on the specific measures was very difficult. And as parliamentarians, we have to hold our governments accountable that targets do not remain empty green rhetorics or PR stunts. They must be in line with the Paris Agreement and be enshrined, and that's the most important thing, be enshrined in binding laws approved by us parliamentarians in our parliaments. When we know that current NDCs are leading towards 3 degrees global warming, we have to challenge our governments to propose legislation for increased goals. Goals that are in line with scientific evidence and reflect the reality of the climate crisis we are facing. And what is of even greater importance is that we actually set concrete measures to achieve these goals. This is what Alina pointed out. It is not the one policy, it is not the one big bill that we have to pass. It's a consistent fight for a just transition towards a fossil-free economy in all of our countries, towards a cleaner planet and towards less pollution. And this is where we all come in. Each and every one of us parliamentarians. In challenging times like this, the role of parliamentarians becomes even more crucial. The political landscape demands that we step up our role as advocates for strong climate policies and also combat misinformation. Let's take our experience here from the COP that we gain from our discussions, from our conversation, and take it back home. Not only to fight misinformation, but also to, by talking to our constituencies, to members of our own parties, to tell them what is at stake. And from my point of view, if we hear these testimonies from the front line, from our colleagues from Tonga, from Chad, from other countries that have contributed the least to this climate crisis, but are already suffering from the effects, these are the testimonies that especially we as representatives of the global north countries have to take back home and share it with our people, also to increase the acceptance of international climate finance, especially for adaptation and for loss and damage. And please don't listen to the lobbyists here at the COP who put profits over our common future. Listen to the voices of our children in their fight for the future. Thanks a lot.
We have been reminded to reflect on why we are here. And I think that should be the compass that guides our conversation. It is clear Austria is doing very well, but without collective action, the efforts that Austria has made will be a drop in the ocean. Honorable members, I want to open the floor now. I want now to get the voices from the members. I will do the first round of interventions, try as much as possible to balance the regions. And there was a list that had circulated. I only received 13 requests for comments, but if you make brief comments, then we can allow other people to contribute. We shall proceed as follows. From the UAE, we have Ms. Mera Al-Swaidi, will be followed by Russia, Mr. Andrei Yaskin, will be followed by Côte d'Ivoire, Mr. Emile Kohu, will be followed by Japan, Mr. Toshiyuki Ochi, will be followed by Indonesia, Mr. Madani Ali Sera, and then we'll do another round of interventions. United Arab Emirates? Yes, please. Let's try 2 minutes.
السلام عليكم. الزملاء الأعزاء السيدات والسادة، نجتمع اليوم لمناقشة كيفية تحويل الالتزامات المناخية إلى واقع ملموس، حيث تمثل المساهمات المحددة وطنياً أداة رئيسية لمواجهة التغير المناخي. والسؤال الأبرز هنا: كيف يمكن للبرلمانات أن تحول هذه الأهداف الطموحة إلى أفعال عملية تؤثر إيجابياً على حياتنا ومستقبل كوكبنا؟ يمثل عام 2025 محطة حازمة في مسارنا المناخي، إذ ستحدد المساهمات الوطنية المعززة خارطة طريقنا نحو تحقيق هدف 1.5% درجة مئوية وفقاً لمخرجات مؤتمر الأطراف COP28. يتطلب النجاح تركيزاً أكبر على خفض انبعاثات الميثان وتعزيز الانتقال في مجال الطاقة وضمان شفافية التنفيذ والمساءلة، بما يتكامل مع أهداف التنمية المستدامة. لقد أثبتت تجربتنا في دولة الإمارات، خصوصاً من خلال استضافتنا لكوب 28، أن البرلمانات قادرة على لعب دور محوري في صياغة سياسات تشريعية طموحة تدعم التحول إلى الطاقة النظيفة، مع التركيز على تعزيز الشفافية وآليات المراقبة الدورية. كما أن التزامنا بخفض الانبعاثات وتطبيق مبادرات مستدامة يؤكد أن التعاون بين البرلمانات والمجتمعات وأصحاب المصلحة يمكن أن يحقق نتائج ملموسة. لتحقيق ذلك علينا كبرلمانيين اعتماد أهداف طموحة وقابلة للتحقيق لخفض الانبعاثات، تعزيز أطر التشريع لدعم التحول إلى الاقتصاد الأخضر، تطوير آليات واضحة للشفافية والمساءلة، وتحفيز الابتكار في مجال الطاقة النظيفة. إن نجاحنا يتطلب منا دورا قياديا واستباقيا وعملا مشتركا يعزز دور البرلمانات كقوة مركزية في ربط بين الأهداف الدولية، الطموحات الوطنية والتنفيذ المحلي، مع ضمان إشراك المجتمعات وأصحاب المصلحة في جميع مراحل العمل المناخي. وشكرا.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mera from UAE. Next will be Mr. Andrei Yaskin from Russia. And you may stand up so that members can see you.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги, друзья. Парламент России, первый заместитель Яцкин Андрей. Я хотел прежде всего поблагодарить Международный парламентский союз и парламент Азербайджанской республики за возможность высказать свою позицию парламента России здесь на парламентской встрече, проводящейся в рамках COP29. Россия один из лидеров международного климатического процесса как по сокращению вклада в выбросы углеродных, так и по укреплению предпринимаемых усилий по обеспечению универсального характера климатических принципов, заложенных в Парижском соглашении. Россия исходит из того, что основные по достижению целей, закрепленных в Парижском соглашении, это прежде всего прирост средней температуры на не более 1,5–2%, а также удержание углеродной нейтральности. С участием парламента России, о чем сегодня говорили уже, сделано очень многое. В 2021 году принят базовый федеральный закон по углеродной нейтральности, который позволил правительству России принять соответствующую стратегию углеродной нейтральности до 2050 года. Эти базовые документы также позволили принять один из титульных экспериментальных проектов. Один из российских регионов, Сахалин, уже экспериментирует с углеродной нейтральностью. Запущена углеродные единицы, организована их торговля. Россия ввела мониторинг национально активных веществ. Это очень серьезная интеллектуальная система. И хочу также напомнить, что в нынешнем году Россия председательствует БРИКС, и в рамках БРИКС вопросы изменения климата, охраны окружающей среды и энергоперехода заняли большую часть обсуждения всех делегаций. По итогам мероприятий БРИКС буквально месяц назад принята Казанская декларация, которая предопределяет необходимость работы по параметрам изменения климата. Это очень важный документ, и мы также обращаем внимание всех участников и гостей сегодняшнего мероприятия на этот документ. И в завершении хотел, коллеги, попросить сообщить о том, что у нас есть такой важный международный форум, Невский международный экологический конгресс, который проводится в Санкт-Петербурге в следующем году, в мае 2025 года, который является серьезной дискуссионной экспертной площадкой, где мы могли бы обсудить вопросы климата, охраны окружающей среды, энергоперехода. Приглашаю всех участников сегодняшней дискуссии, делегатов, экспертов, научное сообщество на это мероприятие. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. We go to Côte d'Ivoire. Côte d'Ivoire, Honorable Emile. Okay, could you give Honorable Emile a microphone? Or okay, use your 2 minutes well.
Merci. Je suis Émile Kou-Guireblou, député de la Côte d'Ivoire, président de la Commission environnement. J'ai conduit ici 2 délégations. Une délégation de l'Assemblée nationale de Côte d'Ivoire, mais aussi une délégation du réseau des parlementaires africains sur le changement climatique qui sont là, s'ils peuvent se lever pour que tout le monde les voit. Monsieur le Président, le thème que nous discutons là, c'est comment faire de nos engagements des réalités, et notamment à travers la mise en œuvre des CDN. Monsieur le Président, ce que je voulais dire ici, au nom de mon pays, mais aussi au nom des parlementaires africains, est que les engagements qui sont pris pour qu'ils deviennent réalité ont besoin d'être accompagnés. Nous avons vu qu'aujourd'hui, les engagements pris lors de l'accord de Paris, les attentes ne sont remplies qu'à peu près à moins de 20%. Et c'est pourquoi les parlementaires africains, il y a 2 mois et demi à Abidjan, ont décidé de se mettre ensemble pour créer ce réseau, qui est le réseau des parlementaires africains sur le changement climatique. Parce que c'est une donnée importante. Le représentant de l'Autriche l'a dit tout à l'heure, nous légiférons pour nos enfants. Et les pays africains qui sont les moins pollueurs sont aujourd'hui les plus atteints. Il nous faut donc nous mettre ensemble en tant que parlementaires. Le secrétaire général Simon, qui est tout à l'heure, a dit qu'un soutien parlementaire aux négociateurs est un atout important. C'est pourquoi nous, en tant que parlementaires, nous avons décidé de nous mettre ensemble pour que l'Afrique, au niveau parlementaire, comme dans d'autres secteurs, parle d'une seule et même voix dans les négociations pour que nous puissions atteindre les objectifs que nous sommes assignés à travers nos CDN. Nous avons donc mis ce réseau en place qui comprend pratiquement toutes les régions. Nous attendons l'Afrique du Nord, mais qui comprend toutes les régions africaines. Et nous attendons donc jouer notre rôle en tant que parlementaires pour que les engagements qui sont pris par nos gouvernements soient des engagements réels, parce que nous, parlementaires, c'est nous qui représentons les populations. C'est nous qui sommes au quotidien confrontés aux réalités de nos populations. Vous avez entendu la jeune fille du Tchad tout à l'heure, et vous avez entendu d'autres. Nous avons les réalités, et pour cela, J'appelle donc tous les parlementaires africains à ce que nous unissions nos efforts pour que l'Afrique ait une voix qui puisse être entendue et qui puisse profiter à nos populations à travers les négociations. Et le réseau a donc cet objectif de faire en sorte que nous ayons non seulement un accompagnement, mais en même temps tisser des relations avec d'autres parlements. Parce que le dialogue doit se faire avec tout le monde. Les Africains, les Européens, les Américains, les Asiatiques, tout le monde, à travers les parlements, nous devons nous mettre ensemble parce que l'objectif que nous poursuivons, c'est le bien de nos populations. Le président de l'Assemblée nationale de Tonga l'a dit tout à l'heure, si nous n'y prenons garde, beaucoup même de pays pourront disparaître. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Honorable Emil. I noticed he came with a small cheering squad from the network that he leads. Next would be Japan. They are setting up translation, so you might need to just wait for a minute as they organize translation services. That then will allow me to call Indonesia. Mardani Alisera from Indonesia. Are you ready? Indonesia, you can take it from where you are. Indonesia?
Indonesia here.
Oh, yes. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Honorable chairs, distinguished delegates. First of all, let me once again introduce our country, Indonesia. We have 7,000 islands, 17,000 islands, and we are among the biggest country who have the rainforests in the world, and we are having 287 million of people. We are representing the country that really care about the environment. Indonesian Parliament, even before Paris Agreement in 2015, already had a very firm concern about climate change. In 1999, we adopted the law about forestry. And since then, we produce more than 10 laws about environmental. We having a sustainable agricultural cultivate system. We produce a new geothermal law. We produce environmental protection and management. We also have a meteorology, climatology, and geophysics laws. We boost our energy to be a clean energy. We also have a law on prevention and eradication of forest destruction. And we develop and strengthening the financial sectors, especially in carbon trading. Right now, our parliament are ongoing process to a draft bill on climate change and a new and renewable energy. In general, our parliaments have been more essential in demonstrating our commitment toward climate action. Not only our parliaments, thankfully our government also support this effort. Indonesia will soon submit second nationally determined contribution. Even we improve our target to 31.98% unconditional and 43.2% conditional. In the previous target, 29 and 41. Indonesia has also adopted long-term vision and formulation for the long-term strategy for low carbon and climate resilience. We also have a national plan on climate change adaptation. And we just adopted just energy transitions this year. We generate also a moratorium on permit of clearing forests. And Indonesia has implemented various regulatory and fiscal incentives such as tax holiday, income tax facility, VAT exemption to encourage green growth and to promote green private investment, focusing on electric mobility, carbon markets, and renewable energy. Before concluding, it is imperative for us as a parliamentarian to ensure that business adopt sustainable practices and providing transparent, accountable report on emission to build a resilient, low-carbon future that benefit not only our environment, but also our economy and community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Indonesia. Next will be Japan, followed by Iran, followed by Nigeria. Is Mr. Yunus Akintunde present? Nigeria. Is that Nigeria? Yes, you'll come next after Iran. Japan.
ご発言の機会をいただきありがとうございます。日本国会代表団団長の千戸周樹でございます。2分ぴったりで終わらせていただきます。来年2月提出が求められている次期 NDC はパリ協定の 1.5 度目標と整合的であることが求められております。加えて我々は現下の現況を踏まえると各国の事情は尊重するものの経済全体の総量削減目標の設定が必要であると考えています。日本では現在、次期 NDC の策定とその裏付けとなるエネルギー基本計画及び地球温暖化対策計画の改定に向けた議論を実施しております。我々日本国会はこれらの計画が 1.5 度目標と整合的であるかと同時に国民生活を守るためエネルギー安定供給及び経済成長を実現するものであるかを確認する必要があると考えております。さらに次期 NDC の策定後はその達成に向け法律の整備や予算配分の議論を進めていくことも我々の役割だと考えております。法整備や予算配分というマクロ的な取り組みに加え、ネットゼロに向けた取り組みへの地方自治体、民間企業、国民等の多様な主体の参画を促すため、議会が果たすべき役割について、パネリストのお考えをお聞かせ願います。加えて、特に私はグローバル企業や大企業だけでなく、サプライチェーン全体での温室効果ガス削減のためにも、地域の小さな企業がネットゼロへ向けて取り組んでいくことが重要で考えております。この点についてもパネリストの皆さんのご意見をお伺い願います。ありがとうございました。
Thank you, Japan. That's a clear question. We proceed to Iran. Proceed in 2 minutes.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. سلام علیکم. رفیعی هستم، نماینده جمهوری اسلامی ایران و اکولوژیست. به نمایندگی از کشوری که قدیمی ترین پارلمان رو در آسیا داره و 118 سال سابقه پارلمانیش هست، قوانین مهمی رو در حوزه حفظ محیط زیست و البته تغییرات اقلیمی گذاشتیم. یکی از مهمترین اونها اصل 50 قانون اساسی جمهوری اسلامی ایرانه که خیلی جدی به مسئله حفظ محیط زیست میپردازه و تخریب محیط زیست رو جرم اعلام میکنه. از طرفی به صورت اختصاصی در سیاست‌های کلی محیط زیست کشور که توسط رهبر معظم انقلاب که به باور من محیط زیستی ترین رهبر دنیاست، در گسترش اقتصاد سبز در اونجا ایشون اعلام کردن و تکلیف کردن برای کشور با تأکید بر توسعه صنعت کم کربن، تکلیفی است که ایشون ابلاغ کردن. و برای اون حتی ضمانت اجرایی هم گذاشتن. ضمانت اجرایی به این معنی که حسابرسی سبز رو گذاشتن. نمیدونم چند تا از شما همکاران عزیز در مجالستون برای تغییرات اقلیمی حسابرسی سبز هم به جهت اینکه درست اجرا بشه گذاشتین. در همین راستا در برنامه هفتم پیشرفت کشور که برنامه عمل سالهای 2023 تا 2027 هم هست، مشخصاً برنامه سازگاری با تغییرات اقلیمی رو مصوب کردیم که در اون تکالیفی برای تنوع بخشی به سوخت و مصرف سوخت و انرژی در کشور رو مشخص کردیم، مثل گسترش 30 گیگاوات برق از محل انرژی‌های تجدیدپذیر. همه این کارها رو کشور من با وجود همه سختگیری‌ها از جمله تحریم‌های مستمر انجام داده. در تحریم‌ها هیچ تسهیلات و کمکی از محل تسهیلات مربوط به تغییرات اقلیمی دریافت نکردیم. از این حیث کشور من با وجود همه این سختی‌ها و گام‌های بلندی که برای صنعت کم کربن برداشته شایسته تقدیر بین المللی هست. حاضریم تجربیات خودمون رو به عنوان کشوری که دانشمون متعلق به خودمون هست با شما به اشتراک بگذاریم و میتونیم با هم کارگروه‌های مشترکی رو تشکیل بدیم و میتونیم با هم این تجربیات رو برای داشتن جهانی بهتر به کار ببندیم. ممنون و متشکرم.
Thank you very much, Iran. We must reserve the last 5 minutes for the panelists to respond, but we still have about 3 minutes. We could ask Nigeria if you can make your intervention in 2 minutes.
Your Excellencies, I'm here to give a commitment and not a contribution of that form on behalf of the leadership of the Africa's most populous nation, a nation of about 250 million that even derive its major income from fossil fuel, and members and staff of the National Assembly that are here. Can you please stand up for recognition? I wish to reaffirm Nigerian government commitment on ensuring that the mitigation commitment made under the Paris Agreement, notwithstanding our national ambition on agriculture, housing, urban renewal, and transportation, translate into national action. We pledge Nigerian legislative support in reducing greenhouse gas emission and ready to fully support effective and meaningful implementation of recommendation of this parliamentary meeting under the occasion of the 29th United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP29. I thank you all.
Thank you. That was an uncharacteristically short intervention from Nigeria. We will get Qatar to make an intervention. And where's the Qatari delegation? Qatar, please get the microphone. 2 minutes, if possible.
السلام عليكم. طبعا أنا من دولة قطر، ودولة قطر لديها أكبر مصدر هي للغاز في العالم، والغاز من أنظف الطاقات، فهو ينتج أقل من عشر ملوثات الفحم عند احتراق توليد الكهرباء أو البترول. نتواجد اليوم أمام تحدي لا يقتصر على دولة واحدة أو منطقة بعينها، بل هو تحدي عالمي يتطلب تضافر الجهود من الجميع. إن تغيير المناخ بات يشكل تهديد مباشر على مستقبل كوكبنا، وهذا التأثير يظهر بوضوح في زيادة موجات الحرارة وشح الموارد المائية وتفاقم الظواهر المناخية، دولة قطر مدركة تماماً المسؤولية المشتركة لتحقيق الاستدامة البيئية، ومن هذا المنطلق تبنت قطر رؤى وسياسات واضحة لدعم ومكافحة تغيير المناخ والتخفيف من آثاره. ففي قطاع الطاقة أطلقت قطر مبادرة للتحول نحو مصادر الطاقة المتجددة، بحيث يكون لدينا خلال حتى عام 2030 40% من توليد الطاقة الكهربائية يكون عن طريق الطاقة الشمسية. اليوم وصلنا إلى تقريباً نصف هذا الرقم، وبإذن الله بحلول 2030 راح نصل إلى الرقم المنشود. وعلى الصعيد الدولي تواصل قطر دعم الجهود العالمية والإقليمية للتصدي لتغيير المناخ من خلال الشراكات والمبادرات التي تطلقها من خلال صندوق قطر التنمية الذي يساهم في دعم المجتمعات النامية التي تعاني من آثار التغيير المناخي. كما أننا في قطر نعمل على تطوير تقنيات التقاط الكربون وتخزينه واستخدامه، ونطمح بإذن الله إلى التقاط 5 ملايين طن سنوياً من انبعاثات الكربون بحلول 2030. هذا التوجه يساهم في التخفيف من البصمة الكربونية لقطاع الصناعات الثقيلة، ويعد جزء من جهودنا لتحقيق التزاماتنا تجاه اتفاقية باريس للمناخ. أنا أتمنى من هالمؤتمر أن يخرج بتوصيات واضحة بأرقام محددة حتى نتمكن من إنقاذ كوكبنا مما ينتظره إذا استمر التغيير المناخي بهذه الوتيرة. وشكرا لكم جميعا.
Thank you very much, Qatar. I am advised that this session must end at 3:15, and we have just about 5 minutes to go. If you put in your request to make an intervention, I humbly request that we can carry it forward to the next session, because the next session also would allow interventions from honorable members. I might be jettisoned off the flight if I don't acknowledge the delegation from Kenya that I came along with. I am with Senator Methu leading the delegation, Senator Hamida, Honorable Kathambi, Honorable Gikaria, and several other members of parliament from Kenya. I believe I've spoken on their behalf, and my sisters from the East African community and the eastern part of Africa. I now want to come back to the panelists for their closing remarks. Could I start with the Honorable Member of Parliament from Austria?
Thank you, dear colleagues, and thank you for your interventions and the question. There was, I think, a very important question by our colleague from Japan in terms of how we make sure that all the stakeholders and actors across the chain and also communities at local level are involved and are on board. I think that's very important. And how does that work? For me, the first and most important aspect is that we have to agree on and pass legislation where this is enshrined, long-term targets with short-term targets as well, so everyone knows, all the economy, everybody knows where the journey is heading. And I think that in the formulation of the target, we have to be very clear. And what I mean by that is not only that the targets have to be clear, but also that when we say climate neutrality, when we say, when do we want to go down by zero, that means that by then we will have stopped using fossil fuels. That climate neutrality means the phase out of the usage of fossil fuels. I think that's very important in the long-term target. The second point I want to make, because you were talking about local communities and we were talking about local communities also earlier, indigenous communities. I think it's very important to empower local communities, to work with them, and also to hear their voices and their protests rather than criminalize them. And there we are talking about climate justice and human rights, and we speak here and gather here. I think it's even a more important point to take. And the third thing is, and we haven't talked about that, it's not about agreeing on doing the right thing, like more renewables. it's also about stopping the bad things. And I think when we as parliamentarians talk about this massive transformation that that is in front of us, if we talk about new NDCs that are in line with the Paris Agreement, we have to be very clear that this means that we have to not only start doing more of the good stuff, we also have to stop doing the bad stuff. And if we talk, for example, about infrastructure that is here for decades, the infrastructure that we building today has to be the infrastructure of a climate neutral world, and we have to keep that in mind, and we have to base our decision on this fact. Thank you.
Thank you. Final comments from Ms. Alina from London School of Economics.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to focus as well, just to add to the previous remarks to the question by distinguished delegate from Japan, and then also comment on finance briefly. So the question was, how can parliaments ensure that the views of different stakeholders are represented and that we engage them in the decision-making process? And I think parliaments can do it in several ways. First, they can actually integrate into the national climate laws the requirements for governments to consult as they develop the key policies. And I think that's the previous speaker has already noted that. But we have seen clear difference. For example, I mentioned the Irish example before. The climate law in Ireland actually requires local authorities, as they prepare their climate plans, to engage with the key stakeholders. And oftentimes that is seen by governments as tick box exercise. So I think the parliaments have a power to ensure that that is not just a tick box exercise. Secondly, as we think about participation, it shouldn't just be limited to organized stakeholder lobbies, not just to green lobby, not just to business lobby. We also need to think about engaging and consulting with citizens. And that's where many European countries have been experimenting with something called citizens' assemblies on climate change, where the mini makeup of the country, citizens drawn through democratic lottery, are brought together to deliberate and learn about climate change, deliberate and provide recommendations to parliaments and to the governments on that. Finally, parliaments themselves can consult. In the UK, the Parliament of Scotland currently is revising climate change law. So they run hearings where they draw contributions, which I think is a usual practice in many parliaments around the world, from a variety of stakeholders. So I think that's the third way in which parliaments can ensure that different stakeholders are represented through calls for evidence and getting input from a wider variety of stakeholders. And then there was a question from the chair on what have we learned about the impact of climate laws on finance. And I think the delegate from Côte d'Ivoire also mentioned that the importance of international assistance in the context of implementing NDCs. So I think what we have seen from the countries we have analyzed, that climate laws generally are helping to improve government's capacity and are resulting in greater public resources internally being allocated to climate change agenda. Many countries that have adopted climate laws have managed to reform their budgeting system, requiring ministries to include specific budgets for climate expenditure, and also are implementing systems for tagging expenditures that are dedicated to climate change through the financial system. Chile is a good example. And finally, I think developing countries that have adopted climate laws are sending very clear signal to the international community that they're being serious about dealing with climate change, that they are building legal frameworks, and that the expectation is that this is will help more to increase international financial resources for the countries that have taken that step. So this is where I would highlight some of the impacts that we're seeing already.
Thank you, Alina. Lucas, you had something in closing?
Yeah, I totally forgot, Moses, about your initial question. Sorry about that. I mean, the one question is whether you get elected for green policies. But the point I want to make is that in the case of Austria, if we're talking about the transformation towards energy independence, climate change is in energy independence. The fact that Austria in 2022 imported oil and gas for the amount of 17 billion euros means that every effort we take to invest in climate change, in renewable energies, in this energy transformation means that we invest in energy independence, which is of economical benefit because our money remains in our country. And I think also it's about building bridges and about building coalitions and making the fight against the climate crisis not only a fight of green parties, but of all of us. It's about making the point that it's also an economically sound policy to transform towards renewables and away from fossil fuels. And in my case, in case of Austria, fossil fuels that we don't have, and we have to buy every single ton of oil and gas, and it's a heavy burden in our economy. And I think there we can also build bridges along, party lines.
So we could conclude, Lucas, that green politics is good politics, green politics is sustainable politics, and we should all aspire to that. Of course, we'll have different routes, different challenges, different short-term priorities, but the long-term aspiration should be to green politics. I know members here, sometimes you might want to focus on the politics that gets you elected, but let's do the politics that will assure a future for Lucas' daughters, for my sons, and for the children to whom we have a responsibility to bequeath a climate or a globe that is fit for living. At this point, I will hand over to the moderator of the next session. I'm going to request that Algeria, Bahrain, Slovenia, Thailand, and Chad, they had made a request to intervene, but because of time, they are not able to intervene. I hope that they can be allowed to make their statements at the next session. Thank you very much, honorable members.
Thank you so much for the interesting discussion. So now we are continue, and we would like to begin with our second session dedicated to the unpacking the global climate finance architecture, mobilizing resources and streamlining access to climate finance. And the moderator of this session is Ms. Nigar Arpadarai, member of the Milli Majlis of the Republic of Azerbaijan and climate change high-level champion for COP29. May I invite the moderator and the panelists to the stage, please.
My Parliament, my planet. My name is Lord Fafanua. I am the Speaker of Parliament from the Kingdom of Tonga. Climate change is affecting every country on the planet, and Tonga is at the forefront of climate change. We're seeing more severe and more frequent cyclones. These tropical cyclones are devastating our country to the effect where about 30% of our GDP is affected every time. We have acidification of the ocean, we have sea level rising, which is causing coastal erosion. Our biosphere is being affected, our plants are being affected. It means that not only are we having scarcity of crops and food, but it's going to have an impact on food production in the future. We'll have to adapt our crops to be more resilient to much more harsher climates. Tonga is, on an economic standpoint, is being affected by the rise in fossil fuels, and because of that, we're moving and transitioning to green energy so that we won't be as impacted by the rise of fossil fuel being a volatile market at the moment. Tonga's updated our NDCs, our nationally determined contributions, under the Paris Agreement in 2020, where we have determined to transition from fossil fuel to 70% renewable energy. That means that we'll have a reduction in our fossil fuel emissions of 13%, and that's based on 2006 levels. Secondly, we're looking at planting 1 million trees by 2023, which is this year. And we're also looking at planting mangroves in our coastal areas so that we can help ease some of that tension from the rising sea levels.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, great honor to see you all here, and I'm really happy to see full room of parliamentarians, policymakers, business people, and leaders from all the other industries. Thank you so much for being here with us. Dear ladies and gentlemen, climate is changing. We can see it, we can feel it, we can measure it. Climate finance, the green transition requires trillions of dollars. This is a very big, very expensive bill to pay. How are we as climate community are ready for this? Will we get this chance to close this gap? We have a really good panelists here, and I would like to introduce our panel to you. We will be going through all those questions, and we will have a chance to give the audience a chance to ask their question also. So, in our panel, we have Mr. Mahmoud Mohieldin, United Nations Special Envoy on financing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and our fellow champion, our dearest colleague. Welcome, Mr. Mohieldin. Mr. Alan Beauvillard, Director of Strategy, Policy and Innovation, Green Climate Fund. Welcome. Ms. Krista Mikkonen, Member of Parliament, Finland. Welcome to Baku. Mr. Samson Matema, Member of Parliament, Member of National Assembly, Zimbabwe. Welcome to Baku. Thank you for your time. And dear panelists, we have a great audience here, and our main question is unpacking the global climate finance architecture, mobilizing resources and streamlining access to climate finance. And the question is current challenges in the global climate finance architecture. I think I will start with Mr. Allen, if possible. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It is now becoming a common understanding that the current climate finance architecture is just failing to deliver against the unprecedented challenges we are facing. We fail in terms of scale, falling short of concessional resources and insufficiently leveraging the private sector. We fail in terms of speed and access, especially to deliver in the region where the resources are the most needed. And we also fail in terms of governance. We have a very fragmented architecture that also leaves too little space to country ownership. So this is why all key players, both public and private, at global, regional, national, and community level, must step up and compromise to do better together, because we are just running out of time. To tackle this challenge, the Green Climate Fund is moving forward to scale up and to speed up resource mobilization and to direct it towards the developing and most vulnerable countries. The Green Climate Fund is actually the largest multilateral climate fund worldwide and is the financial centerpiece of the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. So far, the fund has committed approximately $16 billion of climate investment, mobilizing a total of $61 billion with co-financing across 133 countries. Our portfolio is well balanced between mitigation and adaptation, with strong geographical priorities on Africa, least developed countries, and small islands developing states, because we believe this is where resources are the most needed. We work with a very broad network of partners, including large international institutions like the Multilateral Development Bank, like the UN agencies, but also with NGOs and local organizations directly based in developing countries, such as national development banks. We are currently working with more than 130 accredited entities, and thereof, almost 90 are regional and national based, because they have unique understanding about where the needs and the priorities are in these countries. We can support the country with a full range of instruments, including grants, concessional loans, equity, guarantee, result-based payment, which are tailor-made to the specific country and project needs. The Green Climate Fund is uniquely mandated to take higher risk, to bring private and public capital together for climate action in developing and vulnerable countries. Just to give you an example, equity represents 12% of our portfolio, and 28% of our equity portfolio is actually invested in the least developed countries, where traditional investors would usually not go alone. We're also engaging in more innovative instruments, such as debt swap, because we believe that this type of instrument can, at the same time, tackle both the climate and the debt issues. Last year, our executive director, Mafalda Duarte, announced the launch of the 50 by 30 reform agenda to accelerate this momentum. First, we want to improve access and to accelerate the implementation of the financing. The Green Climate Fund is currently revising the accreditation model to partner with more regional and national entities. We're also adjusting our internal processes to ensure faster and simpler access, project review and approval. We're also focusing on improving project implementation. The GCF has already cut the time from approval to disbursement to a medium of 4.5 months. We also know that project preparation and capacity building are key to deliver on the ground. The GCF has thus launched a new readiness program with an envelope of $500 million grants to empower countries to plan, to manage, and to implement climate actions. This brings me to the second big shift we are pushing. The Green Climate Funds want to support a more country-led programmatic approach, aligned with the country's priority and national strategies. We put a strong emphasis on country ownership, and we want to ensure that projects are designed in consultation with local community, local stakeholders, and governments, and that these projects are fully aligned with national development strategies. From this perspective, country platforms are emerging as a powerful solutions. First, to bring the country back in the driving seat when it comes to translating the high-level political ambition, the NDCs, the NAPs, the LTS, into tangible project pipeline and policy roadmap that they want to implement in priority. The country platform can also ensure smoothest cooperation among the different stakeholders, public and private, international and national. This is essential to reduce the overlaps, to generate catalytic effect, and to leverage the distinctive comparative advantage of the different players. The country platform can also enable a comprehensive approach for a just transition in countries. Transition that includes not only financial, but also technological and socio-economic aspects. Through targeted support across the preparation, the establishment, and the scaling phase, the Green Climate Fund can support countries from the design to the full implementation of such country platforms. For instance, we have just supported the platform launched by Brazil a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C. The third and last point we are focusing on at the moment is on the complementarity and the coherence across the global climate finance architecture. As of today, we have more than 80 climate funds worldwide. And we need to improve this collaboration with other climate funds through harmonized process, for example, accreditation, through coordination mechanism, like the country platform. But also we need to recognize the specific strengths and value added of each fund. This should result first in a clear avenues for funding access for the countries, and second, it should also help having a clear landscape for the donor countries at a time when resources are becoming very scarce. All these efforts are part of our common long journey to tackle one of the biggest challenges of our time, and the Green Climate Fund is very honored to be your partner in this journey. And we look forward to creating lasting, meaningful impact to each of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Boilard. And Mr. Muhyeldin, I would like to ask you, as you know, COP29 is a finance COP. So We are now here and our negotiators are trying to bring some outcome to the COP29. So NCQG is something that we are expecting from the negotiator rooms. But overall, the more I am in this climate community, the more I understand that still the financial architecture is not there. So how do you see this process? What kind of reforms are needed to make sure that the finance flows actually to the developing world and to the places that it is needed the most?
Right, thank you so much, fellow champion. Let me take the opportunity, being here for the second time in the Green Zone. I had a moment to go around. It's as beautiful and as organized and as refreshing as the great work that you did as well in the Blue Zone. So coming from a country from Developing Economies and Emerging Markets Group, you make us all proud. Thank you so much for excellent organization. So let me just trying to answer your question and provide some answers, and whatever could come today from, actually in the coming days from the NCQG will be very much a very small part of the global architecture on finance. However, we need to be ambitious, we need to be fair, and we need it to be with the substance and the impact required. Not just a new lucky figure that, like the 100 billion that was announced in Copenhagen, and we spent years until we knew that it is flowing in the right direction or not. Is it really 100 billion plus as claimed by the updates and the reports that came last year, or is it, as it is challenged by some of the independent organizations, that it doesn't exceed 20 to 25% because of issues related to double counting, and the fact that many of the amounts of money and their challenge are being confused between what is grant and what's investment and what's loan and whether it's concession or not. So in addition to the NCQG figure, we need a better reporting system. We need a better governance system. We need something related to accountability that the parliamentarians, either from the advanced economies committed or for the receiving end, they know in very plain language they use if the money is flowing or not, and it is impactful or not. Saying that, and I'll build my argument in 3 blocks. The first one, that based on UN reports, including the 2 important UNEP reports, one on emissions and one on adaptation, we have gaps on substance that needs to be bridged by gaps on finance. The work that was initiated, and many thanks to your support with the presidency of COP29, we have the update of an important report launched by Nick Stern and Vera Songwe and their colleagues day before yesterday, is telling us that for developing economies and emerging markets, excluding China, assuming that China can take care of herself, we need no less than $1 trillion of external finance, public and private finance. Half of the money should be coming from private sources. The other half a trillion or $500 billion should come from bilateral finance and from the multilateral development banks. What is flowing currently is only a fraction of all of that to all developing economies, and with heavy concentration. So when some people like me describe the current finance affairs to climate to be insufficient, we have the reports that are substantiating this by country and by sector and by domain of climate action, be it mitigation or adaptation, and of course, the loss and damage is going to be even more demanding and is not counted in the figures I just mentioned. If we are saying that it is taking too much time for a dollar to be received by the beneficiaries or the receiving countries, we are supported by evidence that in some multilateral financial institutions, it takes more than 30 months, more than 2 years. And actually, the president of the World Bank was brave enough in Marrakesh last year during the annual meetings when he said it takes more than 27 months for a dollar to get out from the door in any direction, including, of course, climate. So the efficiency and that we need to invest in better governance and better enhancement of the capacity of the MDBs to direct finance where it should be. And the third part which is the worst of them. If insufficiency is not that bad enough, or inefficiency is not that bad enough, we are victims here of something, that the unfairness of concentration of types of finance and the fact that many countries suffering from debt today are pushed to borrow at commercial rates in order to fund climate action activities, especially in adaptation, which are very much definitely important, but they do not proceed any kind of commercial return. So this is the kind of a system that we inherited that needs to be fixed, and it will not just be fixed by a new lucky figure, but by a new architecture that is based on substantiating the amounts of funds. And we have seen that the private sector can do a wonderful job in mitigation, in solar, in wind farms, in decarbonization, in hydrocarbon, but it needs to be enhanced and to be de-risked by the multilateral development banks. And here the de-risking will take two things. First, fixing the information and data, because many of the investors are under the misconceptions and misperception that doing business in countries like in the African continent, for instance, is with high risk. Yes, there is risk, but the risk is exaggerated. The perception of risk, and I refer here to another report, which is the GEM report. This is the report on the emerging markets risk. You can Google it, and you will be finding that credit risk to developing economies and emerging markets doesn't exceed 4 to 5%. So here you are denying, if you are in the private sector or supporting them, yourself an opportunity to invest, and you are denying at the same time many of the potential beneficiaries of solar energy or wind farms the opportunities. That needs as well to be fixed. The final thing here, that we need to build the toolkit for de-risking, for dealing with matters here through insurance, guarantees, taking care of first loss. And here, this is not reinventing wheels. This is not even innovation. Anyone who has been in this system for years, we know that the World Bank had this tool. EBRD has this tool, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The Inter-American Development Bank had these tools. The African Development Bank had these tools. But these tools require more funding to the multilateral development banks. So in all of this complicated architecture, from its local to national to global, from where to start? Two entry points. One, by reforming the multilateral development banks and increasing their efficiency and enhancing their capital. There is no way, these are banks. Banks live in capital. So any kind of confusion, and the G20 is going to be in a few days, that any kind of quality, any kind of better banks is going to be substituting bigger banks, it's just wasting of time. We need to enhance the efficiency, definitely, but we need really to enhance the capacity of these institutions through paid-in capital. And the paid-in capital is not flowing because of the geopolitics. Some advanced economies are playing musical chairs, and to protect their current positions today, they are denying developing economies and emerging markets their fair share in order to be better represented in the board of governance of these institutions. So it's not just one simple solution, but it needs more comprehensive thing. And then that gets me to the very final thing, because I said two entry points. What at the global level? And that required the leadership of parliaments in advanced economies and developing economies to push their governments to play the right game by making these institutions more responsible for their development and climate actions and nature finance as well. Then the role of parliaments, because it ends and starts with the budget. The most important document for which parliaments existed after protecting the constitution of the country is the national budget of the state. If the national budget of the state is not aligned with the NDCs, with the nationally determined contributions, if it is not aligned with the climate strategy, we're wasting our time. If the budget of the state is not really aligning itself with the opportunities, and actually the good news is that you need to spend less today on mitigation by just allowing the private sector to do the job, and you can just do the public-private partnership. But unfortunately, the private sector until this moment didn't get itself into more than 2 to 3% of climate finance for adaptation. So here, this is your responsibility, if I may, for the parliamentarians to monitor the flows of funds. If you see more money going to mitigation to crowd out the private sector, please stop the governments, because the private sector can do this better than anyone. But then you need to adapt for climate action, more in the infrastructure resilience to protect your shores, agricultural systems, water systems, and food systems. So I would say the leadership of parliamentarians, and you are one of them, was demanded in the past, but cannot really be even more important in the future, especially with the new breed of NDC 3.0, which has accountability clause. That is the only way to make it accountable is through governments to parliaments, and there is no two ways about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud. You've made it so clear. It's absolutely, many points are to the point, actually, and especially the role of the private sector, which is increasing and which should be incentivized and which should believe in this green transition. Otherwise, it's just words without action. So it's extremely important, especially what you mentioned about NDCs being aligned with national budget allocations. And also, I think that NDCs should also be aligned with SDGs to make sure that the level of quality of life of people is not going down, but going up. Absolutely agree. So I would like to now pass the floor to our dear guest, Madame Mikkonen. We are discussing the challenges, but I would like to really see what are your experience from Finland, from policy-making perspective and from climate financing perspective. And overall, what kind of challenges do you see in this overall climate architecture, financing architecture?
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, well, first I want to start by telling you greetings from the Finnish grandparents. When I left yesterday the Parliament building, on the stairs in front of our Finnish Parliament House was a group of the grandmas and grandpas, like they are there every Friday. They are climate grandparents, and they want to tell us, the Finnish parliamentarians, that we need to do more climate action now. And dear colleagues, when we are talking about climate finance, the situation is the same. We need more action, and it needs to be done now with the climate finance as well. We need more finance to accelerate the green transition. The longer we wait, the harder it gets to avoid all the loss and damage caused by the hotter climate. We know that the countries have different possibilities, and the richer countries need to help the less developed ones. But there is no excuse for rising economies to hide from their responsibility. If you look back early 90s, when the first agreement on climate finance was made, a lot has changed. Many of those countries which then were listed as lesser developed are today having good rising economies, and they need to carry their part of financing as well. That means all the G20 countries and all the EU countries also, for instance. And when we are talking about climate finance, a huge sum of money is needed. It means that we need not only public, but also we have to mobilize money from the private sector. And even if the sum needed is huge, it's nothing compared to the cost which we will meet if we are not tackling the climate crisis fast enough. Dear colleagues, 2 weeks ago, I met some young climate activists from Uganda and Finland. Finnish and Ugandan youths had been working together within Plan International to make policy recommendations on new collective quantity coal. And they had made a great job. I want to share that with you and ask you all work for their recommendation. And I must say there's a lot what you just said as well. So their recommendations are that firstly, the quantity must be bigger. It has to be based on the known needs of funding, and it means much more money than the previous goal. We also need to keep the promises and achieve the new goal faster than we did with the previous one. Money has to address mitigation, adaptation, as well as loss and damage, and include thematic sub-goals for these areas. It's vital to include loss and damage as a part of the package to ensure sufficient reparation and compensation for the harm already caused. Secondly, the new goal should be publicly mobilized money. Developed country parties should continue to take the lead in mobilizing climate finance. Public and private subsidies need to redirect away from fossil fuel and other environmental harmful industries. Thirdly, the new goal must deliver equity and justice and thereby deliver most of the finance grants. Where loans are considered, it should be concessional loan to minimize passing the debt burden to the children and youth, noting that developing countries are already grappling with debts. And fourthly, the new goal should determine a definition of climate finance that will support transparency and accountability arrangements. Such a definition should incorporate the principles of new and additional finance to official development assistance that is still needed. This will also minimize situation of rebaptizing existing aid as climate finance. New mechanisms need to be developed to ensure that financial commitments are tracked and reported transparently. So, dear colleagues from different parliaments, the youths have to face the long-lasting impacts on their futures. And the youth really expect us, global lawmakers, to take the decision of new goals seriously, keeping the future in mind. Dear colleagues, I assume that in many countries, just like in Finland, climate funding is a part of the official development aid. And just like other development aid, countries are using different channels from bilateral to multilateral aid, investment loans, and grants. And it's good to remember, just like you said, that the different channels means different kind of projects, different kind of stakeholders, and different kind of results. For example, private sector is more interesting of mitigation than adaptation because there are more business opportunities with mitigation than adaptation. For the same reason, private sector is not so interested in the least developed countries. In Finland, we made an evolution on our climate fund. When climate funding was targeted for mitigation work, there were no difference between different aid channels. But with adaptation, NGOs were more active. As well as working with LDC countries, NGOs' climate project included also other development targets like biodiversity, inclusion of disabled, or gender work, much more often than aid given by other channels. So when we set the targets, we need to also think that what are the proper tools to achieve these targets. So dear colleagues, we all know that there are no time to waste. So let's make sure together that we have enough climate funds and climate actions continues strongly in all the countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mikkonen. We will have one more speaker and then we will have interventions from the audience. Mr. Matema, you are coming from Zimbabwe. I wanted to get your angle. How do you see this process? What are the obstacles? What is the role of public-private partnerships? And how maybe regional and local partnerships support this funding process? Please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Session Chair. Thank you very much, Session Chair. Distinguished delegates, members of parliament here present, I'm honored to thank you, Session Chair. Distinguished delegates here present, members of Parliament, speakers of Parliament here present. I'm honored to be here making a presentation representing the Republic of Zimbabwe. We are gathered here at a conference that I feel is a defining conference in more ways than one. By virtue of it being called a finance COP, it should, at the end of it all, respond to the challenges confronting us today, confronting issues around climate change, it being the existential threat to humanity. As legislators here and speakers of parliament, we control the pace, we legislate. The responsibility lies on us to legislate in a manner that will respond to the challenges of our time. We come up with laws that will align the objectives, the real objectives, the Paris Agreement objectives that were set. The 1.5 degrees Celsius target seems to be a moving target for me. It's receding and fast receding because we have not responded to the challenges, the threats that are presented by climate change with the agents of the moment. We are coming out of a serious drought in Southern Africa, and Zimbabwe in particular. The worst drought in living memory. And the summer season, the cropping season is upon us in Zimbabwe. And we've received reports of serious flooding while we are here in Baku. So we are moving from one extreme of a drought to another extreme of serious flooding. So climate change and climate change impacts are real, and we need, with the agents of the moment, we need to respond to those challenges by making sure that we avail the needed resources, and climate finance becomes relevant. It becomes an issue that we need to be seized with as Parliament, as members of Parliament. There are various sources of funding. Unfortunately, the global north, from where I'm sitting, the global north, the fact that they are contributing the majority of global warming, they are contributing massively in terms of global warming. There is a disproportionate impact in terms of climate change impact. The global south that is feeling the pinch, the burden, that is carrying the burden, is contributing very little. So from that perspective, we are saying, in terms of financing, the global north must take the responsibility. They must carry their cross and contribute enough towards interventions, towards mitigation, towards adaptation funds that will lessen the burden that the global south is carrying. You talk of loss and damage. You talk of the commitment that was made post COP27, 28. The global north made a commitment to contribute 100 billion. And there was no follow through to make sure that they make good their commitment. Now we talk of a new development, a new thrust, where we're saying we need to mobilize 1.3 billion, 1.3 trillion. There is a serious disconnect in terms of where we are trying to go and where we are, and the commitments that we are also making as nation states. There is a serious disconnect where we are and where we are supposed to be.
serious disconnect. So from where I'm sitting, representing the Republic of Zimbabwe, we have made strides as Parliament to make sure that we come up with laws that are friendly, laws that are responding to the challenges confronting us. We have a climate bill that is coming before Parliament so that we align our laws to the demands of the day. In September, we launched the National Adaptation Plan, which is a policy position for the government of Zimbabwe, where we need to mobilize resources. And that adaptation plan is looking at mobilizing between now and 2030, mobilizing 10.3 billion in terms of adaptation. We need 4.8 billion in terms of mitigation. But those resources are not readily available. We come up with legislation in terms of taxation. That's where we need triple P's session chair. Public-private partnerships. We need the private sector to come to the party. We need the private sector to begin to invest in that direction, in that space. But we also need laws that are friendly so that there is that investment that will be directed towards climate financing. So there is that alignment that is needed. We need to reset as COP29, as we leave this place. We need to recalibrate. We need to reposition. We need to realign in terms of our interventions and the commitments that we make. Posterity will judge us harshly for failing to respond to the agents of climate change with the agents that is needed. If posterity is going to judge us, let it not be for our failure to respond to the challenges of climate change with the agents that is needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your valuable thoughts. We as COP29 presidency have created a space for all the party and non-party stakeholders to come together and to agree on next NCQG. So it all depends on the parties now, I guess, but our vision is done in a two-way. We always say that enhancing ambition, enabling action. When we speak about enhancing ambition, we speak about ambitious NDCs. And when we speak about enabling action, there where finance, technology, capacity building is coming. So let's see for the outcome of COP. But now, dear ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, we have some questions from the audience. I would like to ask you to stick to 2 minutes, please, and to be seated at your places. So we will have volunteers helping with mics. So the first question will come from Mr. Salvador Malhiero. Mr. Salvador, are you in the room? Please, can you help with the mic? It's working, yeah.
Bonjour, je vais vous parler en français. Je vous parle du Portugal et naturellement, les premiers mots, c'est pour présenter les salutations de notre président de l'Assemblée de la République du Portugal, José Pedro Guia Branco. J'ai seulement 2 messages à vous transmettre. La première, c'est que le Portugal, c'est un pays vraiment engagé dans la lutte contre le changement climatique. Et ça, c'est fait pas avec des beaux discours ou des annoncements, mais avec de la réalité. Au Portugal, depuis jusqu'à juillet de cette année, de toute l'électricité consommée au Portugal, plus de 80% vient de sources renouvelables. D'un autre côté, nous avons déjà une loi fondamentale du climat qui est en train de vigorer dans notre pays. Et le deuxième message, c'est l'importance de la diplomatie parlementaire. Nous savons tous que ce grand problème, ce n'est pas possible d'être résolu seulement. Ce sont beaucoup de pays qui doivent converser, doivent dialoguer, doivent avoir une architecture pour trouver le financement. Et nous, les gens qui viennent des parlements, nous avons l'expérience du dialogue. Nous avons l'expérience de savoir faire des compromis. Et dans ce côté, je crois que c'est l'heure des parlements. C'est l'heure de nous-mêmes avoir l'initiative. Le ballon doit être dans notre côté, pas seulement dans le pied de Cristiano Ronaldo. C'est l'heure de tout le monde pouvoir faire ce qu'il faut faire. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Malheiro. Thank you for your comment. Dear colleagues, two of our colleagues will need to leave soon, so it's a very busy week. So thank you so much, Dr. Mahmoud, for being with us. And I think, Mr. Alain, you will also be leaving us in some time. But again, thank you so much for being with us today. But we continue, dear Excellency. So the second question comes from Jinbin Lee. Mr. Jinbin Lee, sorry. Excuse me. Yes, please.
女士们、先生们、朋友们，大家好！很高兴参加今天的会议，感谢各国议联和阿塞拜疆议会为会议所做的周到安排。我愿借此机会向各位代表介绍中国在积极推动应对气候变化方面取得的经验。中国始终高度重视应对气候变化。 坚持减缓和适应并重的应对气候变化国家战略。习近平主席宣布，中国将力争2030年前实现碳达峰，2060年前实现碳中和，彰显了中国积极应对气候变化的雄心和决心。为落实双碳目标。 中国成立了碳达峰、碳中和工作领导小组，构建起完成1+N 政策体系，积极推进发展方式的变革，采取了一系列行动，取得了显著的成效。2012年以来，中国以年均3%的能源消费增速，支撑了超过 6%的经济增长，碳排放强度累计下降超35%，是全球能耗强度降低最快的国家之一。本世纪以来，全球新增绿化面积约1/4来自中国，率先实现了土地退化 零增长，荒漠化和沙化土地面积双减少。中国全国人大常委会将应对气候变化相关立法和监督工作作为重点的领域，先后制定和修改了关于积极应对气候变化的决议、环境保护法、环境影响评价法、 大气污染防治法、可再生能源法、循环经济促进法、清洁生产促进法、森林法、草原法等一系列法律，并开展了法律实施情况的检查和专题调研，为应对气候变化提供了有力的法律保障。女士们、先生们， 中方愿同各方携手，遵循联合国气候变化框架公约及其巴黎协定公平、共同但有区别的责任和各自能力的原则，共同反对借气候之名实施保护主义单边措施，多做有利于团结合作的事情，为落实公约及其巴黎协定 营造凝心聚力、团结合作的积极氛围。谢谢。
Thank you, Mr. Lee, for your inputs. And now we go to the next speaker, Liam Byrne. Mr. Liam Byrne from UK. Yes, please, volunteers. With microphone, please. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Liam Byrne from the United Kingdom, but also chair of the Parliamentary Network on the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Madam Chairman, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. And I open with an offer. Today, we are very proud to launch the global chapter on climate finance for the Parliamentary Network, and I invite everybody here who is a parliamentarian to join. I wanted to offer just a word of humility and a word of determination. Humility because the truth is that collectively we are failing the people we serve. We are failing to protect them from the old extremes of poverty and the new extremes of the element. We now have 700 million of the people we serve living in extreme poverty. That figure has not gone down in the last few years, it's gone up. We now face a lost decade of development, and we now face 1 in 5 of the people who send us into power facing the risks of extreme weather. That is why we should be determined. That is why we should be advocates for mobilizing $6.5 trillion worth of climate finance each and every year between now and 2030. That's why we should be advocates for building a bigger World Bank and a bigger International Monetary Fund. And that is why we should be advocates for a bold and ambitious replenishment of the International Development Association in December. Why? Because in the world's poorest countries, it is 50% of people that face the peril of extreme weather. For too long now, richer countries have been pumping emissions into the Earth's atmosphere. And now the message must go from this conference that it is now time for richer countries to step up and pay the bill. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Byrne. The next speaker, Mr. Rastislav Vreko from Slovenia. Yes, please, floor is yours. Can volunteers help with microphone, please?
Ladies and gentlemen.
We can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Achieving climate neutrality is essential central goal of both Paris Agreement and Agenda 2030. In European Union is setting more this climate target. Therefore, Slovenia also we must stepping up efforts combat climate change. In Slovenia is with his traditional very diversity landscape, and this due also facing increasing challenges due to climate change. Shifting temperatures, unpredictable rainfall.
Mr. Reko, sorry, can you please make louder? Yes.
Closer.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you
thanks.
so much, thank you.
Unpredictable rainfall and extreme weather events are all affecting our food production. As you may know, just over a year ago, Slovenia was struck by severe flooding, and the recovery process will take many years. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture is therefore crucial. We must also promote soil carbon sequestration, make sustainable use of resources, and advance a circular economy. Equally important is adapting our agricultural systems to withstand climate change, focusing on building resilience, reducing vulnerability, and preserving the vital functions of ecosystems. We must continue to seek solutions that support climate action, food security, and sustainable food systems. Along with shifting towards more sustainable consumption and production patterns are also essential steps. The transition to net zero emissions and greater resilience will require funding that goes beyond what public resources alone can provide. Therefore, we need to mobilize all available resources, including innovative financing mechanisms, all financing mechanisms to achieve these goals. Thank you.
Thank you for your inputs. And the next speaker is Mr. Rotham Khunmurak from Thailand. The floor is yours.
Honorable Chair, panelists, and colleagues. Thus far, we are encouraged by global efforts from every corner of the globe to address climate change, particularly the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund at COP27 and the advancement of the new collective quantified goal on climate finance at this COP29. However, Thailand would like to emphasize the need for more accessible and better leverage global climate finance, especially for developing countries and vulnerable countries without leaving anyone behind. Thailand, as one of the nations most affected by climate change, is currently advancing a Climate Change Act, in which one of the key mechanisms in this draft law is the establishment of a climate change fund to facilitate the transition to a low carbon economy and enhance climate adaptation to reduce the impact on our citizens. I also would like to inform that this year, the Thai Parliament has initiated the Green Parliament project with the ambitious goal of achieving a net zero parliament by 2032. We therefore would like to call for stronger international commitments to ensure greater accessibility to climate finance and increase contributions to ensure adequate financial support to developing states needed for the development of innovative technology, investment, and human resources to combat climate change effectively. Thank you. ขอบคุณครับ
Thank you for your inputs. We have a couple of more minutes and 4 speakers. Mr. Ravindra Erlangga, please, from Indonesia. Mr. Ravindra, over to you, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Ravindra, Honorable Chair, from the House of Representatives of the Republic of Indonesia. It is common knowledge that countries or communities that contribute least to carbon emissions are those disproportionately affected or displaced. Few developed nations are responsible for 79% of historic carbon emissions. Thus, the 100 billion per annum climate finance commitment under UNFCCC not only becomes a lifeline, but also a necessity to avoid a catastrophe. Annual climate change damages are expected to cost the world half its GDP by 2050. Indonesia currently contributes 1.7% of CO2 emissions. We are committed in our second NDC to reduce carbon emissions by 31.89% without international help and up to 43.2% with global financing aid. The upcoming NCQG must do better and reflect the actual cost of addressing the climate change crisis. This is estimated around 5.8 trillion per annum in covering both mitigation and adaptation. Innovative financial tools such as climate resilient debt clauses, that means loans or grants that has friendlier terms to developing nations, because the terms of the loan could often be taxing or stressful for developing nations. Loss and damage funds, as well as carbon credits. Indonesia is currently planning to raise $65 billion by 2028 through carbon credits provisions. With this, I would like to ask a question as well to the panelists. How do you incentivize the private sector to play a role in climate change mitigation and adaptation financing? And how can we establish a global carbon credit market so that nature-based solutions can be employed and inventorized around the world? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ravindra. I wanted to ask maybe someone from the panelists would like to respond to that. But we will go to the next speaker and then we will summarize. Yes. Mr. Hasaru Miyazaki from Japan.
ご発言の機会をいただき大変にありがとうございます。日本国会の宮崎勝と申します。日本は気候変動対策支援として2025年までの5年間で官民合わせて最大計700億ドル規模の支援を行うとの気候資金コミットメントをこれまで着実に実施をしております。加えて緑の気候資金の第2次増資の機会に最大1650億円の新たな拠出を行うことを表明したほか、ロス&ダメージに対応するための基金の立ち上げ経費として1000万米ドルを拠出をいたしました。しかし、気候目標の達成のためには気候変動対策のさらなる投資拡大が求められており、すべての資金フローをパリ協定の目的に一致させる必要があると考えております。また、公的資金だけではなくて民間資金を一層拡大させることが必要不可欠であります。また、パリ協定第9条2項においては、先進締約国以外の締約国に対しても支援の自発的供与あるいはその継続を推奨しております。同様に COP28 のロス&ダメージに関する決定文書においても、資金協力について先進締約国以外の締約国に対し自発的供与あるいはその継続を奨励をしております。我々日本国代表団は日本国会代表団は今般の議員会議の成果文書はパリ協定及びこれまでの COP での合意に即したものであることが必要と考えており、ロス&ダメージ支援への資金拠出が先進締約国のみに求められるものではない旨の修正案を提出をいたしました。残念ながら最終草案への反映は叶いませんでしたが、気候変動対策に向けた財源の確保が大きな課題となる中で、支援を行う能力のある締約国の貢献も含め、各国の協力が必要不可欠である旨を申し述べさせていただきます。ありがとうございます。
Thank you for your inputs. We have two more speakers, Mr. Muhammad Askari from Iran. Mr. Muhammad Askari, yes, over to you. Yes, we are ready for the intervention. Please, Mr. Mohammed, over to you.
خب عرض سلام دارم محضر همه سروران عزیز. نگرانی اولی که وجود داره ضمن تشکر از برگزاری این مراسم، عدم اجرای تعهدات از سوی دولت‌های صنعتی و توسعه یافته هست. مسئولیت تاریخی بخش عظیمی از چالش‌های زیست محیطی جهان امروز چون انباشت گازهای گلخانه‌ای و گرمایش جهانی با کشورهای توسعه یافته است. کشورهای توسعه یافته در راستای تعهدی که براشون ایجاد شده متأسفانه به تعهدشون عمل نکردند. نکته دومی که وجود داره بحث مربوط به مسئله ایجاد صندوق جبران خسارت ناشی از تغییر اقلیمه. بالاخره کشورهای در حال توسعه منتظرن که کشورهای توسعه یافته کمک مالی بکنن به این موضوع. در حوزه بحث مسائل مربوط به استفاده از ظرفیت‌های علمی تخصصی متاسفانه اقدام آنچنانی صورت نگرفته. در بحث سلامت عمومی حوزه زیستی تقریبا چیزی نزدیک به 3 میلیارد نفر در سراسر جهان تحت تاثیر دارن قرار میگیرن که در این راستا هم متاسفانه اقدامی صورت نگرفته. بحث تحریم‌های سیاسی ظالمانه و اتخاذ تدابیر یک جانبه از سوی کشورهای توسعه یافته علیه کشورهای در حال توسعه هست، از جمله جمهوری اسلامی ایران که به بهانه‌های مختلف مانع جدی در مقابله با تلاش‌هایی است که می‌تواند در حوزه بحث اقلیم کمک بکنه. بحث بعدی که وجود داره استفاده از انتقال دانش و فناوری است، تأمین منابع مالی و ظرفیت سازی به منظور تسهیل اجرای اقدامات مرتبط با کاهش انتشار و فضای گلخانه‌ای است. خب از طرفی هم ظرفیت‌ها و قابلیت‌ها در حوزه کشورهای در حال توسعه ظرفیت‌ها و قابلیت‌های بسیار خوبی است. کاپ 27 کاپ 28 انجام شده، متاسفانه خروجی نداشته. اگر بناست کاپ 29 هم این گونه عمل بکنه، قطع به یقین باید همه کشورها نسبت به مأموریتی که بهشون محول میشه ایفای نقش بکنن. آنچه که ما بررسی میکنیم و بررسی شده در کنفرانس ها اعلام شده ولی عملاً اجرایی نشده تو این حوزه. تاکید ما بر اینه که آنچه از منظر ایران در حوزه تغییر اقلیم، کنوانسیون مربوطه و موافقتنامه‌های پاریس که بسیار مهم هست، باید انتقال دانش بنیان باشه، تأمین منابع مالی باشه و ظرفیت سازی باشه که تو این زمینه متاسفانه اتفاقات آنچنانی رخ نداده. نکته دیگه در رابطه با بحث ریزگرده هاست که متوجه خیلی از کشورهای در حال توسعه هست. کشورهای صنعتی کره زمین رو گلخانه‌ای کردند، همه ظرفیت‌ها رو برای توسعه خودشون به کار گرفتند، منتها در حوزه مأموریتی خودشون ایفای نقش نکردند. اینجاست که ما معتقدیم اگر بناست برای سلامت مردم، سلامت کشورها کاری صورت بگیره، اولین کسانی که باید کمک بکنند به طور خاص از نظر مالی کشورهای توسعه یافته هستند. سود تغییرات اقلیمی رو اونها بردن، امروز اینها هستند که باید کمک بکنن به کشورهای در حال توسعه یافته. قرار نیست در راستای تغییرات اقلیم فقط کشورهای در حال توسعه ضرر بکنن. حتما باید کشورهای توسعه یافته در راستای مأموریتشون ایفای نقش بکنن که همه ملت‌ها و همه کشورها به سهم خودشون بتوانن مسیر توسعه رو دنبال بکنن. ممنونم.
Thank you, and we have last speaker from the audience, Mr. Abdullah Chenini from Algeria. Mr. Abdullah. Yes, please.
شكرا. في البداية أشكر دولة أذربيجان والسيدة جافاروفا على هذه الدعوة لبرلمان الجزائر للمشاركة معكم. أود في البداية أن أذكر أن بلدي الجزائر قد أمضت والتزمت بكل الاتفاقيات الموقعة من أجل حماية البيئة وكذلك مكافحة التغيرات المناخية، وخاصة اتفاق باريس، وهي ملتزمة به، وخاصة في خفض الغازات الدفيئة ب7% في حدود 2030. ومن أجل ذلك فيه مشاريع كبرى، من بينها المخطط الوطني للانتقال الطاقوي في آفاق 23 بالبدائل عن الوقود الأحفوري، وكذلك المخطط الوطني لمكافحة التغيرات المناخية. وفي مجال التشريعات دسترت الجزائر مكافحة أو عفوا حماية البيئة في دستورها، وجعلت البيئة السليمة حق لمواطنيها، وانبثق عن ذلك كثير من التشريعات. في برلماننا كنا صادقنا على كثير من القوانين، من بينها قانون حماية الغابات، وقانون حماية المناطق الخضراء وتصنيفها، وأيضا قانون تدوير النفايات، وجعل هناك مسؤولية قانونية وأحيانا حتى جزائية للذين يسيئون إلى البيئة ويغيرون فيها. وكذلك هناك مبادرة قام بها برلماننا وهو إنشاء شبكة برلمانية للبيئة والمناخ التي أترأسها، وهي تعمل بطريقة أفقية مع كل القطاعات ومع المجتمع المدني للتحسيس بهذه المخاطر. ونأمل من إخواننا خاصة في الدول المتضررة الإفريقية أن ينضموا لننشئ شبكة دولية من البلدان المتضررة خاصة من التغيرات المناخية. أيضا بالنسبة للتمويل، نحن في بلدنا ملتزمون بكل ما أمضينا به وندعو إلى الشفافية خاصة في التمويلات. وهنا أنوه بالمبادرة التي اتخذها رئيسنا رئيس الجمهورية في خلق صندوق للتمويل الإفريقي أو صندوق إفريقي للتمويل عن الكوارث الطبيعية، وهذه مبادرة نتمنى أن تحظى أو أن يقوم الممولون بدعمها. ولكن نحن فقط لا نطالب بالتمويل، وإنما نطالب كذلك بنقل التكنولوجيا. فبلدي الجزائر تقع في الخط الأول من التأثيرات السلبية للتغيرات المناخية في شمال إفريقيا، خاصة في نقص المياه، في التصحر، في تأثير ذلك على المحاصيل الزراعية. ولذلك نأمل من المانحين أن يكونوا أكثر شفافية في التمويلات، وخاصة الإيفاء بالتزاماتهم النقدية وتسهيل وصول هذه التمويلات دون الصعوبات التي نراها أحيانا خاصة في الدول الإفريقية. كما نأمل منهم أيضا نقل التكنولوجيا بطريقة سلسة. العالم مهدد بخطرين أقولها لكم، مهددين بخطرين أساسيين: التفجيرات النووية التي لا نتمنى أن تحدث، والتغيرات المناخية التي نراها الآن في أمامنا. لذلك فلنتضامن جميعا من أجل هذا المسعى، وشكرا.
Thank you, dear friends. That was the last speaker from the audience. And if you would like to respond, yes, please, maybe we have just a couple of minutes and we will see. Yes, please. So, please.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for all those talks you had. And maybe I will make my final speech here, our conclusion at the same time, but I also want to answer the question where they were, what they were asking, that should we have a global carbon emission market? And I think we should, because one of the tools which has very well worked in the EU is the emission trading system, and it has been the key that when there's a price for the carbon, price for the climate emissions, it makes you to find new ways to make energy and cut down the emissions, and that's where the private sector especially comes into picture. And I think that would be the great thing to have that. And then I also want to mention that at the moment the big problem is that we don't have the price for the harms. We are all very depending on different kind of resources provided by the nature, so-called ecosystem services, which are vital, pollinators, flood protection and things like that, that we don't need to pay anything for that. But if we are losing them, what is now happening in many places, that will cost a lot. And if we have a price for that, price when we are making harm for the nature, it can be the climate emissions, or it can be the other harm things, that will help us to make all these better choices also more profitable. And that's also where we can make more business for that, and then the private sector will help us. But then, of course, we are living in the same planet, so we all need to do more. Or the consequences what the climate crisis is already causing, they will hit all of us. Now already some of the countries has had them more severe than the other ones, but it will be our common problem, so we all need to work harder. And of course the richer countries, they have the more possibilities and they need to be more active. And like it said here, we have failed, we all have failed, and we really need to do better, because if we don't, there's no future for our children and our grandchildren.
Thank you, Ms. Mikanen. Mr. Matema, would you like to add?
Thank you very much, Session Chair.
Thank you very much, Sachin Chair. Just a follow-up to some submissions that were made. I think in terms of the structure of the financing, it's important that the global north must realize that we all have a common obligation, but in our differentiated capacities, differentiated responsibilities. And to that end, there has to be resource mobilization that lean towards grants as opposed to loans, because that will keep the global south in a perpetual cycle of debt. So as we leave this place, we must be very clear in terms of our direction of travel with regards to how we are going to structure or propose to structure the financing. Number two, it's also important that we respond in terms of that financing, the 4 A's, in terms of the availability of those resources, the accessibility of those resources, affordability and adequacy, very critical. It's one thing to make pronouncements and another thing to make those resources available. That has been the tragedy of our time, that the global north will make commitments, but they don't follow through. So we need to be very clear in terms of that. And finally, Session Chair, we have our work cut out. IPU COP29, leaving this place, we have people that we represent. We make pledges, the people that we lead, that we represent. What is it that they are going to say as we leave this place? It means we should be making commitments that are real, commitments that are actionable, commitments that we can actualize. So that's the commitment that we must all make, given the common responsibility that we have to make Mother Earth or planet Earth a better place for all of us, so that when we meet next time at another COP in Brazil, maybe we'll be singing a different song altogether as a collective, because we have a collective responsibility. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, dear ladies and gentlemen. That was a very interesting discussion. One thing is clear. The climate is changing, and it impacts all the world. It impacts every region of the world. Yes, we all feel it in a different way. We see people from small island states, when they come, they say that when we are going back, we don't know whether our country will still be there because the level of the ocean is going up. We live by the coastal, we live by the Caspian Sea, and we see the level of the Caspian Sea going down. So we all feel the impacts of the climate change, which means that we live. It brings us to the moment when this is threat, and the scale is so big that we need whole of society approach, and we also need whole of global community approach. So that's why the scope is extremely important, and I would like to take this chance to thank every single person in this room for caring, for being here, for sharing your inputs, and this is the momentum, and I'm looking forward for the outcomes of the COP as all of you together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Mon Parlement, ma planète. Je suis Natacha Pouchin, députée à l'Assemblée nationale du Bénin, et je suis membre du réseau Climat à l'Assemblée nationale. Le changement climatique est un défi, le principal défi aujourd'hui dans le monde et particulièrement dans la sous-région ouest africaine, le Bénin est frappé de plein fouet. Nous avons observé un dérèglement des saisons. Aujourd'hui, de plus en plus, il y a des inondations en permanence et quand la saison sèche arrive, elle vient parfois plus tôt, endommage les cultures. Nous avons des questions au niveau de l'agriculture. Les saisons ne sont pas les mêmes, les cultures ne sont pas bonnes. Donc les populations ressentent la question du changement climatique de plein fouet. Et c'est pour cela que et le gouvernement et le Parlement ont pris les mesures nécessaires pour essayer d'apporter des solutions à cette urgence. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, c'est une urgence dont tout le monde a conscience. Le Bénin, depuis 2018, a adopté une loi sur le changement climatique. Au-delà de cette loi-là, il y a l'ensemble des députés qui sont sensibilisés, qui sont encouragés à faire des sensibilisations dans leur circonscription électorale sur l'impact du changement climatique. Il y a des actions comme le reboisement que l'Assemblée nationale organise. Nous avons aussi interpellé plusieurs fois le gouvernement, les ministres du cadre de vie, pour nous expliquer qu'est-ce qui est fait, où en sommes-nous par rapport à notre contribution déterminée au niveau national, les engagements internationaux pris par le Bénin, où en sommes-nous, et ils nous apportent régulièrement les informations. Aujourd'hui au Bénin, notre contribution déterminée actualisée en termes de financement, nous avons besoin de 10 515 millions de dollars et ce financement va être mobilisé par les fonds publics, le trésor public, mais les acteurs du secteur privé et aussi les appuis internationaux. Nous mobilisons depuis quelques années la communauté internationale et les banques régionales pour nous accompagner dans ce secteur-là.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, I have attention please, because I have to remind you that you should take your badge with you and you should keep them on you. Otherwise, you are not will be allowed to come here to the pavilion for tomorrow and at the same time for all the events that you are trying to participate in. And now we are continuing with our last session about enhancing resilience in the face of climate change, scaling up adaptation and local empowerment. And the moderator for the session is Mr. Marwan Al-Mehairi, member of the Federal National Council of the United Arab Emirates. Please welcome to the stage, and we are welcoming all the panelists to the stage as well.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, parliamentarians, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted to be moderating this final session for today. I hope that you have enough energy to keep up with this interesting discussion. The topic of this session is on enhancing resilience in the face of climate change, scaling up adaptation, and local empowerment. The climate change is already affecting people around the world, and it's affecting every corner of the globe. Lives and livelihoods are being uprooted everywhere. And in this session, we will be discussing efforts at the local level, at the national level, and at the global level to boost adaptation, support for the people living on the front lines of climate change. This will also be an opportunity to discuss how parliaments and parliamentarians can support their countries' national adaptation plans, as well as share good practices on empowering local communities to drive climate action. In this panel, we will hear from experts, practitioners, and parliamentarians to understand the wide variety of stakeholders who are leading adaptation efforts around the world. First of all, I would like to start with Mr. Jonathan Stone, Manager of a Climate, Environment and Resilient Unit of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, to give us his speech. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, and congratulations to you all for what I'm sure has been a very interesting day, and I'm sure that you're quite excited to go for dinner and the reception, so I will try and be brief for you all. It's a huge pleasure for me to be here today on behalf of our Secretary General, who sends his apologies for not being here. He's a far better speaker than I am, but you've got the same speechwriter, at least, for this. So I work for the Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent National Societies. I'm pretty sure almost all of you will have one of those in your country. Maybe you have one of our local branches where you are. But for those of you that don't know, we're in over 191 countries. We have 200,000 local branches and over 16 million volunteers. Maybe many of you in the audience have already been a volunteer. What you might not know about the Red Cross, Red Crescent Network is we don't just do humanitarian response. We also work in advance of emergencies to help adapt to climate change. And in fact, we have a plan to spend 1 billion Swiss francs by 2027, helping over 100 or 500 million people become more resilient to climate change. Now, our national societies and volunteers always rise to the challenge, and they often get in harm's way in the process. Now, my challenge to you all in your constituencies would be to go and knock on the door of your local Red Cross, Red Crescent branch, or the National Society, and tell them what you need from them. We are ready to support you in the activities that you would like to do to tackle climate change. And I just want to kind of talk maybe and give you a few perspectives of some of the things that we do. Of a particular understanding for us about what climate is doing is that those who are most vulnerable to climate or in very vulnerable situations, what makes you vulnerable one day to the next might change. Maybe you get paid one day, maybe you don't get paid the next day, you're more vulnerable. Maybe at the weekend you're working and you work outside in the heat. Maybe you have family in hospital. So what changes each day can make us vulnerable in different ways. But for a long time, what we've seen when it comes to adaptation and resilience is that I think often we hope that investments of infrastructure or systems will trickle down. And I'm sure all of you at a parliamentary level in your constituencies feel the same thing sometimes. You wait for funding to trickle down to your area, to then implement, to then trickle down to the people who need it the most. And one of the things that we're very passionate about is starting from the most local level possible. So we work in communities, wherever they are, whether that's cities or in other areas, to understand what they can do and how they can change and what support they would need. And I want to maybe leave you with 3 ideas that we're very passionate about, and I'll make it easy. They all start with M, and it's momentum, momentum, momentum. Okay, so it's the same word 3 times. We really think that there needs to be momentum for action that is local as possible. If we start right at the ground level, right in the community, right at the most affected people and work our way up, then our collective effort will make the difference between life and death. We also need to see momentum towards partnership. For a long time, the Red Cross has been the last organization in any kind of delivery chain of assistance. But increasingly, we want to work with you all to make sure that we engage with you much further up. And we have really interesting examples of this with cities, where we talk to cities and we identify who might be in need of which services during a heat wave, for example. So that if there is a heat wave, we can staff a cooling center where people can come and get rest. We can find who you might need to direct health support towards. And then the final momentum is towards collaboration, not competition. We are just one humanitarian organization here talking to you today. There are many more. There are also many people in civil society and different sectors. And I was just hearing from my colleague in the Emirates that, the Emirates, they work very hard to make sure that these organizations like ourselves coordinate together very well. And so that is my plea to you. Please make us coordinate better with you. We want to, we're available, and we would love to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the insightful remarks that you've given. I would like to emphasize on two points that Jonathan have covered: the role of working with communities on their own needs that they have identified, and momentum in action, momentum engagement, and momentum in collaboration, which is very important in this settings. I believe that Jonathan have to leave for other commitments, so Jonathan, thank you for your time and contribution. Now I'll give the floor to Ms. Atallah, who is the Chief of Adaptation and Resilience Branch in the Climate Change Division of the United Nations Environment Programme. Ms. Mirai, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and my apologies for arriving late. It's my great pleasure to be here and to address a very, very critical group of stakeholders in addressing climate change adaptation and resilience. I don't know if I need to remind you of the figures in terms of what is the cost of climate impacts. Honorable Member of Parliament from Pakistan will remember that after what was called the monsoon on steroid in 2022, Pakistan really went through the most horrific impacts of flood. The post-disaster needs assessment estimated that the cost of that flood on infrastructure, on displacement, loss of livestock was almost equivalent to $40 billion. Now, who pays the bill when there is a climate calamity or a climate disaster? First and foremost, no matter what the international appeals for support and what the response, first and foremost, it's national treasuries. So for that reason, really the message that I want to convey today is that climate and adaptation to climate does not rest in a climate law. It rests in agriculture, it rests in infrastructure. When budget committees in Parliament are approving loans, it rests in these loans. When you are approving infrastructure development plans, it rests in these infrastructure development plans. When you make decisions on energy, it rests in this bill on energy. Why? Because today, roughly 40% of infrastructure is vulnerable to climate impacts. And the loans that you have agreed to may actually become an additional cost burden to your national treasury because the way that the infrastructure is designed has not taken into consideration future climate impacts. Second, Pakistan, I'm just going to focus on Pakistan because you're next to me. But Pakistan has also experienced some of the worst temperatures in terms of heat waves, hitting 50 degrees almost. That means that the productivity of any productive sector is impacted by those. It means that there is a moral imperative to protect workers that are working outside, to make sure that water breaks are embedded in labor laws, to make sure that accessibility to water resources is also embedded in labor laws, that the timing of outside or outdoor work is calibrated to make sure that we are not exposing workers to extreme heat and to those periods of extreme heat. Third, there's a dimension of intergenerational equity. Because decisions that you make today, again, Pakistan has passed a law recently on carbon markets. And we are all looking at carbon markets as an opportunity to generate resources and to generate income into treasuries. However, when we decide that we are going to sell mitigation outcomes from easy to abate sectors today at a low carbon price, that means that it's the next generations in 10 to 15 years that will have to pay the cost of what we call hard to abate sectors. Hard to abate sectors are energy, infrastructure, transport sectors, because when you make an investment in those sectors, you lock it in for the long term. Fourth, when you have building codes, when you have bills that are coming to you on buildings, for instance, making sure that they are holistic, that you don't have one building code for flood-prone areas, one building code for insulation, one building code for energy efficiency, but rather that they address all of these different aspects together is absolutely critical, because the cost of retrofitting buildings to future climate is much higher than the cost of embedding those solutions right now from the onset. And maybe lastly, it's a plea to make sure that in whatever bills you are looking at, cities can access finance. Currently, we have 50% of global population living in cities. 70% of cities are set on or around a water body. Cities are the spaces where the highest heat temperatures and heat island effects are recorded, and cities are also where the solutions come from. So in looking at vulnerability assessments and risk assessments, if a specific focus on urban settings and on cities is absolutely critical, because cities also generate 60% of global GDP, and while these are global figures, we extrapolate, we look at them at national level, and they're roughly in the same order. So when you want to protect your economy, when you want to protect your people, please make sure that cities are receiving an appropriate allocation of these resources. And last, nature is your biggest ally. We have started to look at natural capital accounting. We have started to look at nature not as a free asset that economies or economic productive systems can actually utilize as if it's a free resource. When you destroy a forest, it takes $13 per hectare on average to replant that forest, and we will not be able to replant it in the same way. When we lose vegetation cover, a landslide will generate much more economic impact than the fact of having destroyed these vegetation areas. So when you are, again, looking at land use planning, urban planning, again, it's a plea to make sure that you leave space for nature in those plans, because nature is one of our strongest insurance mechanisms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Atallah, on your remarks. I totally agree on that the resilience it's important to have a holistic view and integrated view on when preparing governments and cities and countries to be more resilient, especially if we are looking at either policies or master planning or any other part of this effort. Now, we will move to the final panelist in our session, Mr. Uwais Haider Jakar, who is a member of the National Assembly of Pakistan. Mr. Jakar, please, the floor is yours.
Hello. Hello. I'm good with this. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Assalamu alaikum. Esteemed delegations and Member of Parliament, it is great honor for me to be a representative of Pakistan at COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. We all gather here united by a common cause, which is the urgent need to combat against the climate change. Saving our planet, lifting people out of poverty and economic growth, these all are one and same fight. We must connect the dots between the climate change, water scarcity, energy shortage, global food security, and women empowerment. Solution to one problem will be solution to all. Pakistan contributes less than 1% of carbon emissions around the globe. But unfortunately, Pakistan has become the 5th largest country that has severe impact of climate change on it. So in this regard, I will say that the Himalaya region and the Hindu Kush region of Pakistan that possess largest number of glaciers in the world are melting rapidly than ever. Studies say that by the end of 2050, 80% of these glaciers will melt. But taking in time measurements, by taking positive steps, we can bring this figure of 80% to 40% just by working on the neutrality of the carbon. Pakistan has taken multiple steps to fight against the climate change. Pakistan initiated 10 billion trees tsunami, in which we are planting 10 billion trees across the country. This project is not only focusing on the environment, but it has also helped us for sustainable livelihoods, because this project also comes with multiple jobs for which we have provided jobs to thousands of people. Pakistan is also aiming to shift its energy sector 60% on renewable source of energy by the end of 2030. Also, Pakistan is aiming to shift its vehicles, 30% vehicles, to the electric vehicles. We have banned production of power from the imported coals, but we are also working for the gasification and liquefaction of the indigenous coal. We're also going to, our parliament is also going to implement the concept of soul share, in which any home that has installed solar panels on its building will be able to transfer energy to its neighboring homes, and that particular home will act as a microgrid. This microgrid will further be connected to the national grid. And with this activity, we will able to reduce 25% carbon emissions and also to increase the income of that particular home by 30%. I would like to conclude that Pakistan is ready to provide its knowledge, its resources, and its technology to fight against the climate change. We are here with the promise that we will leave this planet livable for our future generation. And the Parliament of Pakistan promises that we will transfer water, land, and air to our posterity like it was transferred to us by our forefathers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Awais, for your insights and experiences. Now I would like to open the floor actually to your, since we finished with the panelists, we'll open the floor to the delegates to have your remarks and intakes or interventions. But I have to remind you that the interventions have to be brief. It's in 2 minutes and it's from your own seat. I have a list here of different requests. We'll start with Mr. Ali Mohammed from Bahrain. Mr. Ali. Mr. Ali from Bahrain.
From here or from there? From my seat? السلام عليكم. شكرا رئيس الجلسة، وأحب في البداية أن أشكر الجمعية الوطنية الأذربيجانية والاتحاد البرلماني الدولي على تنظيم هذا المؤتمر. أنا اسمي محمد علي من مملكة البحرين من مجلس الشورى، التي تعتبر مملكة البحرين من الدول التي تشارك بفاعلية في كل المؤتمرات والمحافل الدولية المتصلة بتغير المناخ منذ مؤتمر الأطراف الأول عام 1995، وهي من الدول النامية ذات التأثير الذي لا يذكر في انبعاثات غازات الدفيئة لكنها من الدول المعرضة للآثار السلبية المتوقعة لتغير المناخ باعتبارها دولة جزرية صغيرة المساحة. البحرين من أوائل دول المنطقة التي تتبنى سياسات واستراتيجيات فعالة للتصدي لتغير المناخ وآثاره، مدعومة بإطار تشريعي متكامل أهمه قانون البيئة والمصادقة على اتفاق باريس وما قبلها من صكوك قانونية في مجال تغير المناخ. إن قيادة البلاد وعلى رأسها صاحب الجلالة الملك المعظم والحكومة برئاسة ولي العهد رئيس مجلس الوزراء الموقر حريصة على دعم العمل المناخي على المستوى الوطني والدولي للتصدي لآثار تغير المناخ. وقد أعلنت مملكة البحرين خطتها الوطنية للحياد الصفري بعام 2060، وهدف ذلك خفض الانبعاثات بنسبة 30% بحلول عام 2035، ومع توقع ارتفاع الطلب على الطاقة سنويا بنسبة 2.5%. تعمل المملكة على زيادة مساهمة الطاقة الشمسية في الشبكة الكهربائية من 10 إلى 20% بالتعاون مع القطاعين السكني والتجاري، وإنشاء صندوق لتعويض انبعاثات الكربون لمساعدة الأفراد والشركات. والمبادرات التي أطلقتها المملكة تطوير استراتيجية المرونة الساحلية التي تتضمن إجراءات تنفيذية لحماية السواحل من ارتفاع مستوى سطح البحر، كما أطلقت مشروعا لزراعة ملايين الأشجار. إن نجاح العمل المناخي يتطلب تكاملا وثيقا بين الاتفاقيات الدولية والتشريعات المحلية، حيث يجب أن تسير جنبا إلى جنب في منظومة متناسقة. وقد عملت الدول منذ فترة طويلة على تطوير التشريعات والسياسات والإجراءات العملية لمواجهة تحديات تغير المناخ، إلا أن هذه الجهود التشريعية والتنفيذية على أهميتها تبقى محدودة الفاعلية دون توفر التمويل الكافي والملائم. فالعديد من الدول النامية رغم كونها الأكثر تضرراً من ارتفاع تغير المناخ تجد نفسها غير قادرة على تخصيص الموارد المالية اللازمة لتنفيذ برامج التكيف والتخفيف المطلوبة. وقد جاء التزام الدول المتقدمة بتوفير التمويل المناخي كأحد أبرز مخرجات مؤتمر الأطراف COP28 الذي عقد في دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة العام الماضي، حيث تم الاتفاق على ضرورة حشد الموارد المالية لدعم الدول المتأثرة وتعزيز قدراتها على مواجهة آثار التغير المناخ. ويعتبر هذا الالتزام خطوة أساسية نحو تحقيق العدالة المناخية، إذ يجب أن تتحمل الدول الغنية جزءاً من المسؤولية نظراً لدورها التاريخي في انبعاثات غازات الدفيئة. واليوم يأتي مؤتمر الأطراف COP29 المنعقد في باكو كعاصمة أذربيجان كمحطة محورية لتفعيل هذه الالتزامات وتطوير الآليات. ويتميز هذا المؤتمر بتركيزه على ترجمة التوافقات التي تم التوصل إليها في الإمارات في COP28 إلى خطوات عملية وآليات تنفيذية واضحة. لذا فإنه حري بهذا المؤتمر أن ينهض بعزيمة راسخة وتصميم نافذ للتغلب على كافة التحديات والعقبات، وأن يعمل على تسيير سبل التمييل بروح من التعاون البناء وتحمل المسؤولية المشتركة، حيث أن مكافحة تغير المناخ وآثاره تتطلب دعما دوليا حقيقيا وفعالا، خاصة من الدول الغنية القادرة على تقديم المساعدة للدول الغنية. ويجب أن يتجسد هذا الدعم في صورة مبادرات وبرامج تمويلية ميسرة تمكن الدول النامية من تنفيذ خططها وبرامج للتكيف مع تغير المناخ والمساهمة في الجهود العالمية للتخفيف من آثاره، وذلك لضمان استدامة هذه الجهود وتعزيز ثقة المجتمع الدولي في قدرة البشرية على مواجهة هذا التحدي المشترك انطلاقا من مبدأ المسؤولية المشتركة ولكن المتباينة. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you, Mr. Mohammed. Now we'll move to Ms. Ivy Mochoki from Kenya.
Good evening. I stand before you here today, not just as a Kenyan, but as a representative of the Global Youth Parliament East Africa. And one of my interventions is that to build resilient communities and address intersecting challenges of climate change pandemics and food insecurity, where over 800 million people globally go without food each day. Parliament must embed adaptation and finance within legislative frameworks. This requires the enactment of a National Adaptation and Food Security Act to prioritize climate resilience, sustainable agriculture, and disaster preparedness while empowering youth to drive these efforts. A dedicated adaptation and food security fund should be established to provide young people with equitable access to financial resources, including grants and low-interest loans, enabling them to develop innovative and community-driven solutions. These solutions should focus on climate-smart agriculture, ecosystem restoration, food systems that can withstand crises like floods and pandemics, incentives such as tax breaks, streamlined access to resources should support youth-led initiatives tackling food production and distribution challenges. Legislation must also mandate capacity-building programs to equip young people with the skills to implement sustainable farming practices, establish local food systems, create adaptive technologies, investments in digital tools, such as early warning systems for climate risks and mobile platforms for agricultural markets, must be prioritized to enhance both resilience and food accessibility. Youth representation in policy-making processes is critical, ensuring their voices shape strategies to mitigate food insecurity and adapt to climate impacts. Public-private partnerships should be incentivized to scale community-driven projects such as flood-resistance farming, afforestation, localized food storage solutions, transparent resource allocation mechanisms will ensure funding reaches those most affected by food shortages and climate disasters. By embedding these measures into parliamentary acts, we can address the urgent need for food security while empowering young people to lead in creating resilient, adaptive, and self-sufficient communities. This approach not only mitigates immediate risks, but also lays the foundation for sustainable solutions for global hunger and climate challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ivy. Now we'll move to Mr. Zaur Shukarov from Azerbaijan.
Thank you very much. My name is Zaur Shukarov. I am a member of the Milli Majlis of the Republic of Azerbaijan. First of all, I would like to thank the panelists of this event for the meaningful ideas and impactful discussions at the time when the fate of our planet in its entirety is at stake. In the light of climate change, engaging in critical climate negotiation potentially contributes to our joint efforts to tackle this global issue. Ladies and gentlemen, my country, Azerbaijan, which has implemented various projects aimed at expanding renewable energy sources, protecting the environment, and reducing carbon emissions, is actively participating in international climate initiatives and taking significant and result-driven actions to address and deal with the challenges related to climate change. Azerbaijan has been carrying out important national and international projects for the transition to renewable and clean energy. Globally important initiatives put forward by Azerbaijan within the framework of COP29 that has been underway in Baku for a few days now is a clear manifestation of how our country pays special attention to this issue. It is gratifying that an agreement was reached on Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement on the very first day of COP29, and these raise hopes that positive decisions will be made during the upcoming discussions. The Milli Majlis Parliament of the Republic of Azerbaijan is also active in this process. Joint meetings with international parliamentary institutions, including the IPU and the Non-Alignment Movement Parliamentary Network, are an indication of this commitment. It should also be noted that the non-members of the Milli Majlis of the Republic of Azerbaijan have always showed unanimous support in the process of adopting legislative acts related to environmental issues at the national levels. The recent amendment to the criminal code on the introduction of criminal liability for ecocide in Azerbaijan and the solid support of this bill by fellow MPs should be underscored. I would like to address a question to representative of UNEP. To be honest, I planned to ask not just you and the representative of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent, unfortunately left. Most probably you are aware that during almost 30 years, so our territories, Karabakh and Eastern Zangezur regions of Azerbaijan, were under Armenian occupation. After liberation of these territories as a result of the 44 Days Patriotic War in 2020, and implementation of the 4 United Nations Security Council resolutions by Azerbaijan itself, we witnessed the complete destruction of our historical, cultural, religious monuments, and huge ecological damage perpetrated by Armenia during the period of occupation. Armenians even burned beehives when they left Kalbazar district of Azerbaijan. During the occupation, Armenia burned more than 1 million landmines in our territories, resulting in serious humanitarian and ecological problem we face today. In the period from November 10th, 2020 and to November 11th, it's almost 4 years, about 400 people died and injured as a result of the explosion of these mines. In addition to endangering people's lives, landmines have caused severe soil and river contamination, significantly disrupted the land, affected vegetation cover, water infiltration, and the flow of surface water, and have made vast areas of valuable agricultural land inaccessible. So the question is UNEP planning to provide any support to countries, including Azerbaijan, as well as a local community suffering from the environmental damage caused by landmines? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shekarov. But if you don't mind, we will keep all the answers or remarks from panelists at the end of the interventions. Now we'll move to Ms. Karason from Turkey.
Merhabalar. Öncelikle konuşmamı Türkçe gerçekleştireceğim. Hepinize iyi akşamlar diliyorum. Bütün katılımcıları saygı ve sevgiyle selamlıyorum. Dost ve kardeş Azerbaycan'a hem böyle büyük bir organizasyonu başarıyla gerçekleştirdikleri için hem de nazik ev sahiplikleri için bir kez daha çok teşekkür etmek istiyorum. Tabii Türkiye Akdeniz Havzası'nda bulunduğu için bu 1,5 derecelik ısınma senaryosuyla karşı karşıya kalan ülkelerden biri. Ülkemizde de geçtiğimiz yıllar içerisinde bugüne kadar karşılaşmadığımız oranda aşırı yağışlar, seller ve orman yangınları ne yazık ki gerçekleşti. Dolayısıyla durumun ciddiyetinin farkındayız ve Türkiye olarak kararlı bir duruş sergiliyoruz. Cumhurbaşkanımız Sayın Recep Tayyip Erdoğan'ın adını Yeşil Kalkınma Devrimi koyduğu bir süreci hayata geçiriyoruz. 2053 yılı için net sıfır emisyon hedefimizi koyduk. Bu noktada azaltım ve uyum strateji eylem planlarımızı hayata geçirdik. Bunun yanında çok önemli projeleri sıfır atık gibi Sayın Emine Erdoğan hanımefendinin öncülüğünde gerçekleşen, fakat bugün sınırlarımızın ötesine taşınarak Birleşmiş Milletler nezdinde kabul gören ve 30 Mart tarihinde Dünya Sıfır Atık Günü olarak bu vesileyle önemli çalışmalara imza atılan bir süreç yaşıyoruz. Kendi yerli ve milli elektrikli aracımız TOG'u şu anda yollarda ve inşallah küresel bir marka hedefiyle her geçen gün gelişmekte. Yine aynı şekilde dünya üzerinde orman varlığını artıran nadir ülkelerden biriyiz. Her yıl 11 Kasım'ı Milli Ağaçlandırma Bayramı ilan ettik ve milyonlarca fidanı toprakla buluşturuyoruz. Bugüne kadar 7 milyar fidan toprakla bu vesileyle buluşmuş oldu. Tabii değerli konuşmacılar, sizlerin bahsettiği şehirlerimizin kırılganlıkları ve ihtiyaç duyduğu, dirençli şehirlere ulaşabilmek için ihtiyaç duydukları yeşil altyapılar önemli ve aynı zamanda yeşil şehir hedefleri de tabii bir o kadar önemli. Biz de bu noktada çalışmalarımızı, özellikle ulusal ölçekteki çalışmalarımızı yerel ölçekte de gerçekleştirmek istiyoruz ve bu noktada yerel yönetimlerle birlikte çalışıyoruz. Tabii şunu da söylemek gerekir ki bu meseleyle, bu küresel meseleyle mücadele konusunda küresel politikalar, ulusal politikalar ve yerel politikalar çok önemli. Fakat bütün dünya milletvekilleri de şu anda buradayken özellikle gelecek nesiller için adil ve doğaya saygılı bir gelecek inşa etmeyi konuşurken dünyanın birçok yerinde ne yazık ki savaşlar ve çatışmalar bugün de devam etmekte. Hepinizin bildiği gibi Filistin'de büyük bir insanlık dramı yaşanıyor. Çocuklar, yaşlılar, kadınlar, masum insanlar İsrail'in saldırılarıyla hayatlarını kaybediyor. Fakat yalnız hayatlarını kaybetmiyorlar, aynı zamanda geleceğe dair umutlarını da kaybediyorlar ve bu savaşlar neticesinde, bu saldırılar neticesinde toprağa, doğaya bulaşan kimyasallarla gelecek umutları da yok oluyor. O yüzden biz inanıyoruz ki daha adil bir dünya mümkün. Eğer daha çok çabalarsak daha adil bir dünya mümkün. Bu noktada ben bu toplantıların umut ediyorum ki insanlık için daha adil bir dünyanın mümkün olduğuna olan inancı arttırmasını temenni ediyorum. Teşekkür ediyorum. Sağ olun.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we'll give the floor to Mr. Rahayu Saraswati from Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and honorable delegates. It's Mrs. First of all, Indonesia would like to second our honorable colleague from Kenya's interventions. My colleague and I, we represent 52% of 280 million of our people. We are the fourth largest population, and 52% of which are the youths, Gen Zs and millennials. Our middle name is adaptation. We adapt very well, and it is because we have such a large bonus demography in Indonesia that we were able to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic. And now we would like to call upon parliaments around the world to first of all support educational initiatives and local training that equips communities with the skills needed to adapt sustainability. Second, we would like to call upon parliaments to ensure transparent, inclusive decision-making. As we have heard from a previous representative of the indigenous peoples, that message should be followed through in our respective countries. And of course, we would like to ask each and every single one of you, how many of your parliamentarians, how much of a percentage of youths, how much of parliamentarians, how much percentage of women, how many percentage of persons with disabilities? Only when we have an inclusive parliament can we truly instill change within our countries. We would also like to call upon parliaments to continue working together. If it is impossible to move forward as we have heard from other colleagues, the difficulties, the differences between developed countries and developing countries, on those who have emitted the most amount of carbon and the most amount of pollution, and who have contributed the most to the climate crisis. If we cannot have the change that we need, I would like to call upon parliaments here, if you have access to those grants, to those financial aids, that you may bypass the bureaucracies because the youths of our countries and the local communities are there. We have the startups, the social enterprises that work in providing solutions and innovations for the climate crisis. And of course, we would like to also highlight one final thing, in that many developing countries like Indonesia, during the time of the Industrial Revolution 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, countries like ours were going through colonization. We were not able to fully exploit our natural resources because they were being exploited by other countries. And so we would like to ensure that any adaptation and local empowerments keep in mind the international inequality that exists within our countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Saraswati. Now we'll move to Mr. Toshiyuki Ochi from Japan.
ご発言の機会ありがとうございます。日本国会代表団の内俊之でございます。日本は2018年に気候変動適応法を制定し、気候変動適応計画の策定を政府に義務付けるなど、幅広い関係者が協力して適応策を推進するための法的枠組みを整えております。これにより 農林水産業、自然生態系、社会インフラ、そして健康等のさまざまな分野で適用策が進められております。一方、近年の大台風や大雨は生命や家屋といった財産を奪い、道路等のインフラを破壊し、結果として地域コミュニティの分断や崩壊を招くようなケースが日本各地で発生しているのが現状です。今後は適用策も緩和策と同様に継続していく必要があるということを地域コミュニティに根付かせることが重要になります。このためには地方議会の役割も大きいと考えます。また、日本が抱えている人口減少や少子高齢化社会の影響も最も受けている地域コミュニティでは、気候変動に脆弱な子どもたちや高齢者、そして女性への配慮が必要です。日本の気候変動適応計画では、ジェンダー平等や脆弱性の高い集団や地域にも配慮した意思決定、合意形成プロセスの充実を図る旨が記載されています。地域コミュニティにおいて、レジリエンスの強化とジェンダー平等や脆弱性の高い集団への配慮、これを同時実現するために必要な視点についてパネリストのご意見をお聞かせください。ありがとうございました。
Thank you, Mr. Rochi. Now we'll move to Mr. Mustafa Lunis from Algeria.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين. أولا أمثل البرلمان الجزائري بصفتي عضو في الشبكة للبرلمانيين للمناخ والبيئة. يشكل التغيير المناخي أحد أكبر التحديات التي يواجهها العالم اليوم، حيث يهدد الأمن الغذائي والموارد المائية ويؤدي إلى تفاقم تصحر. في هذا السياق تعد الجزائر مثالا يحتذى به في جهودها لتعزيز القدرة على الصمود في مواجهة هذه الظاهرة، وذلك من خلال استراتيجيات ومبادرات طموحة. أولا، جهود الجزائر في مكافحة التصحر مشروع السد الأخضر الذي يمتد على مسافة 1500 كيلومتر. هذا المشروع الذي كان في السبعينات واليوم يعد من جديد، ويبدأ فيه الذي يوقف التصحر، خاصة يعني زحف الرمال واستدامة الأرض. أطلقته الجزائر في السبعينات كحاجز بيئي يمتد من مسافة 1500 كيلومتر، يهدف وقف زحف الرمال وإعادة تأهيل الأراضي المتدهورة. تطبيق قوانين صارمة مثل قانون لحماية البيئة 013 وقانون الغابات لتنظيم استخدام الموارد الطبيعية وحظر الممارسات الضارة كالرعي الجائر واحتطاب العشوائي. تعزيز مبادرات التشجير، إطلاق حملات سنوية لزرع ملايين من الأشجار لتحسين الغطاء النباتي. ثانيا، التعاون الدولي والإفريقي للانضمام للاتفاقيات الدولية مثل اتفاقية الأمم المتحدة لمكافحة التصحر، مما عزز التزام الجزائر بتنفيذ الخطط الوطنية وتتوافق مع المعايير الدولية. تعزيز التعاون القاري، إنشاء آلية قارية لاستجابة الكوارث الطبيعية لتعزيز التعاون بين الدول الإفريقية لمواجهة التصحر والجفاف. ثالثا، تعزيز القدرة على الصمود، التنمية من بينها التنمية الريفية المستدامة، دعم الفلاحين والتقنيات، دعم الفلاحين وتقنيات الري الحديثة لحماية الأراضي الزراعية، تقديم الحلول المبتكرة للزراعة في المناطق الجافة، توعية وإشراك المجتمعات المحلية، تعزيز الوعي بأهمية الموارد الطبيعية وإشراك السكان في تنفيذ المشاريع البيئية. رابعا، إجراءات وتوصيات لمكافحة التصحر والرعي الجائر. توسع في التشجير، تركيز على زراعة الأشجار والنباتات المقاومة للجفاف في المناطق المهددة. إعادة تأهيل الأراضي المتدهورة، استخدام التقنيات الحديثة لتحسين خصوبة التربة واستعادة المناطق المتضررة. تعزيز البحث العلمي، تطوير الدراسات حول التصحر وأسبابه ووضع حلول مبتكرة للحد منه. إنشاء مناطق محمية، تحديد مناطق يمنع فيها الرعي لتحديد الغطاء النباتي أو لتجديد الغطاء النباتي. تنظيم النشاط الرعوي، إصدار تصاريح للرعي تحدد المناطق والفترات المسموح بها. توفير البدائل للسكان المحليين، تقديم دعم اقتصادي للرعاة لتبني أساليب مستدامة مثل زراعة الأعلاف، توصيات الدولية والمحلية، دعم المالي والتقني، زيادة استثمارات الدول في مشاريع مكافحة التصحر في الجزائر، تعزيز الوعي البيئي وإطلاق حملات توعية محلية ودولية حول مخاطر التصحر والرعي الجائر. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
شكرا لأخ مصطفى. Now we'll move to Ms. Sumaya Rafi' from Iran.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. جناب رئیس، همکاران گرامی، اول از همه میخواهم از مهمان نوازی مجلس آذربایجان و سازماندهی این جلسه تشکر کنم. معتقدم جوامع محلی در خط مقدم تأثیرات آب و هوایی قرار دارند. باید به منابع و پشتیبانی مورد نیاز برای سازگاری مؤثر در برابر تغییرات محلی مجهز شوند. بسیار مؤثر است که مقامات محلی، ملی، منطقی در استراتژی‌های سازگار نقش مهمی رو ایفا کنند. بازیگران سطح منطقی نیز باید تلاش خود را در جهت ایجاد یک چشمانداز منطقی هماهنگ کنند. چارچوب سیاست ملی در چارچوب سیاست‌های بین‌المللی باید انطباق داشته باشند. ساختار و پشتیبانی لازم را برای جریان سازی استراتژی‌های سازگاری، افزایش مقیاس‌های تطبیقی، تضمین سازگاری در مناطق مختلف از جمله نکات بسیار مهم می باشد. این موضوع برای تضمین آینده است که همه جوامع علیرغم پیشینه‌های مختلف و چالش‌های ناشی از تغییرات آب و هوایی مسیر توسعه و رشد خود را طی می‌کنند. چشمانداز بستری برای همکاری، اشتراک دانش و یادگیری از یکدیگر و اقدام جمعی است. تعهد به این چشمانداز در زمانهای مختلف نقش بسیار حیاتی و ملموس را دارد. پیشبینی و بررسی خطرات تغییرات آب و هوایی و سرمایه‌گذاری در تاب‌آوری جوامع محلی بسیار پرهزینه است، اما یک سرمایه‌گذاری مطمئن برای نسل‌های آینده است. کربن زدایی و برنامه‌ریزی برای اهداف ملی نباید متوقف شود، بلکه برعکس کاهش از یک سو، کاهش سازگاری از سوی دیگر باید با قوت ادامه پیدا کند. مجلس شورای اسلامی با توجه به تأکیدات رهبر عزیز انقلاب و تأکیدات رئیس جمهور محترم و مجلس شورای اسلامی از همه پروژه‌های ظرفیت ساز در سطح ملی، محلی که باعث قدرتمندسازی و توانمندسازی جوامع ملی شده و نسبت به گذشته میزان تاب‌آوری آنها افزایش پیدا کرده بسیار حمایت می‌کند. نظارت بر پروژه‌های توسعه با تاکید بر حفظ محیط زیست، تاکید بر توانمندسازی و ظرفیت سازی به جای مقابله با چنین تغییراتی با رویکرد پیوست زیست محیطی، دانش بومی در زمینه تاب‌آوری و سازگاری با اقلیم. مزید اطلاع همه همکاران از 11 اقلیم در سطح دنیا 9 اقلیم رو جمهوری اسلامی داراست که تاکید اساسیش بر دانش بومی و منطقی دارد. با تشکر.
Thank you. Now we'll move to Ms. Saniwan Buaban, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, from Thailand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable panelists and colleagues, I'm Saniwan Buaban, the member of the Thai Parliament. Thailand just confronted with the flood and landslide in the north of the country, And the main problem is we still don't have the comprehensive early warning system. And when we talk about the scaling up and also empowering the local people, we need to think about the support, resource, and opportunity. Of course, Thailand still needs an international support, both financial support and technical support. As the parliamentarian, many acts in Thailand need to be revised to be more decentralized, power and inclusiveness. The government shall allocate the resource, information and manpower to the local community for empowering them. And as Ms. Myri from UNEP talked about the carbon price, right? When we use about the carbon market, we don't need to forget to think about the climate justice. We also need to mainstream the climate justice principle in every level from individual, organization group, and also at the national level in order to leave no one behind exactly. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. Now we have closed all requests for interventions. I'll give the floor again to Ms. Atallah to have her final remarks, and then we'll move to Mr. Awais.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for all the questions that have been also raised. I will try to address as many of those as I can. First and foremost, maybe on the question of Bahrain, and it was a recurrent question on the allocation of resources, and on the issue of what is being negotiated here, the new collective quantified goal on finance. I think this gathering plays an incredible role because the negotiating positions are negotiating positions of your governments. However, none of these actually materialize until there's a parliamentarian bill that is taken that decides on the allocation of resources, both for domestic purposes and for international purposes. An example of this is the UK that has a law that provisions that 1.5% of GDP is going to be allocated for international climate finance. Another example is in the case of Norway, where the allocation of public treasury for the Norwegian International Climate and Forest Initiative has to go through Parliament. Another example is the case of Germany, where allocation of resources for international climate cooperation is currently blocked by Parliament. So really, it's the role of parliamentarians, because at the end of the day, whether it's in developed or developing countries, the decision of resource allocation and budgetary allocation lies in Parliament, and members of Parliament are primarily pursuing what they need to deliver to their citizens. So this union is critical in making sure that through the exchanges that you have and through the collaboration that you have, such bills are taken both for domestic budget allocation and for international budget allocation on climate. I think also reflecting on the question from Indonesia as well, that brings me to the nationally determined contributions and to the fact that we have many countries that have actually enshrined their nationally determined contributions in law, and that have two parts to the nationally determined contributions, one that is conditional and one that is unconditional. Meaning what is unconditional will be delivered through domestic resources, what is unconditional will be delivered through resources coming from international support, whether it's foreign direct investment, whether it's grants, whether it's concessional loans. So when you are looking at your NDC, really pay close attention to what are the commitments that are made there, and also deliver on those commitments. When Indonesia made the commitments to halt deforestation and Indonesia has reduced deforestation by 41%. When Indonesia started demonstrating that it's walking the talk, so to speak, and that there is law enforcement and serious implementation of commitments and laws, this is when international finance started to flow as well. So I think it's a little bit of that, demonstrate the implementation of your domestic laws, and then international finance will follow. On the question from Azerbaijan, UNEP has a resolution. We have a UN Environment Assembly where resolutions are made. We have Resolution 215 that deals with the protection of the environment in areas affected by armed conflict. I don't think I can read all the text of the resolution, but as a result of this resolution, we actually did an assessment of environment in Azerbaijan in 2022. And currently, technical assistance is underway in order to address the impacts of conflict on the environment. We also support Azerbaijan with non-conflict environment issues, such as, for example, currently a scientific assessment of climate impacts on the Caspian Sea. And we call on all the member states around that are riparians of the Caspian to be part of this process that the government of Azerbaijan is putting forward on collaboration on the Caspian Sea. And lastly, on the question of Japan, it's a very interesting question on the integration of resilience and gender, because unless we do a proper assessment of how climate impacts gender differently, and gender is not only about women, gender is the differentiated impact on women and men and marginalized people and children, then we cannot understand how to protect them. And so it's a very strong encouragement for you to look at the different climate impacts, the role of different gender in society, in the different sectors, and looking at what measures can help address those impacts. And congratulations to Turkey on the provisions that you have made and on the progress that you have made, as well as Algeria that has mentioned really very important steps in those directions. But I really want to mention that Istanbul is one of the cities that has been designated as generation restoration cities because the mayor of Istanbul has, with the support of Parliament, has made some really important steps in increasing green areas, in increasing renewable energies, and in making sure that transport systems are sustainable transport systems. I think I've responded to everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Atallah. Now I'll give the floor to Mr. Uwais to give his final remarks.
In the end, I would like to say that we must realize that our climate is changing because of human activities. It is not the nature that is changing our climate, it is us. So, in this spirit, we must provide awareness to our whole nation. We must spread public service messages. We must add subjects and courses on middle, secondary, and higher secondary levels about climate change, so that our nation, our posterity must be aware that what we have to do to protect our climate and what we do not have to do for our climate. Our parliamentarians must select one of the goals from Sustainable Development Goals. For me, I am working on first 5 and goal number 13. I am working on no poverty, zero hunger, quality of education, quality of health, and climate change. And somehow all of these goals are connected to each other. So it is my request to all the developed countries, first world countries, that they must come forward. It is a collective action that we battle against the climate change. They must support the underdeveloped countries, the third world countries like Pakistan, and also the countries which belong to Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Awais. Before closing, I believe that one of the most important elements of all of our discussion is being more dynamic, to be more resilient. It's important to be dynamics in policies. It's important to bypass bureaucracies in order to adapt quickly to the fast changing pace of challenges that are facing us right now. And by that, I believe that we have finished this session. We have concluded all interventions. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your discussion. So we are closing day one and hope to see you tomorrow. And I have two reminders. Please note that you have to take your badge with you tomorrow and for all the events. And the second reminder is that buses for the official reception will leave at 6 p.m. in front of the green zone. Thank you so much.
Bir.